My wife and my brother violently shoved me out of a helicopter, hovering thousands of feet above the frozen, unforgiving wilderness of the Canadian Rockies to collect a $6.5 million life insurance policy. They left me to die in the freezing mud, completely unaware that a hidden cockpit dashcam had recorded their entire murderous plot, and that I possessed enough primal willpower to survive just long enough to lock the heavy oak doors at my own funeral. My name is Ethan. I am 34 years old, and exactly 2 years ago, the very people I trusted most in this world colluded to violently end my life. To understand how my own flesh and blood and the woman I shared a bed with became my executioners, you have to understand the deeply toxic, poisonous soil in which this ultimate betrayal was planted decades ago. I grew up in a comfortable, upper-middle-class suburb of Toronto. In my family, there was a silent, strictly enforced script that everyone followed. My older brother, Marcus, who was 4 years my senior, was the undisputed golden child. My parents, Arthur and Helen, worshipped the absolute ground he walked on. Marcus was the charismatic high school athlete, the boy with a crooked smile who could talk his way out of any punishment, and he was utterly, ruthlessly selfish. I, on the other hand, was the invisible second child. I was the quiet nerd who spent my weekends locked in our dusty garage, taking apart old motherboards and teaching myself complex coding languages while Marcus was out crashing my parents' cars and throwing wild parties. When I graduated as the valedictorian of my high school, securing a full-ride academic scholarship to a prestigious university, my parents handed me a generic greeting card with $50 inside and barely looked up from the television. 3 years prior, when Marcus barely scraped by with a D average, they threw a massive catered backyard barbecue for 80 people and bought him a brand new sports car. When I finally asked my mother why my massive academic achievement was completely ignored, she sipped her white wine and looked at me like I was a burden. "Ethan, you're naturally smart," she scoffed dismissively. "Things come easy for you. Marcus has to work so much harder. He needs our encouragement. You'll figure it out on your own." That was the theme of my entire existence. Ethan will figure it out. When Marcus went to college, my parents completely drained their retirement savings to send him to an outrageously expensive private university because he needed the elite networking. They handed me a brochure for a local community college. I didn't complain. I worked grueling, 80-hour weeks at a freezing logistics warehouse, breaking my back on the night shift to pay for my own textbooks, rent, and eventually, my transfer to a top-tier tech program. I learned early on that nobody was ever coming to save me. Fast forward a decade. I took that relentless, desperate work ethic and poured it entirely into a cybersecurity software startup. I worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping under my desk, sacrificing my 20s entirely. By the time I turned 32, my company was valued at over $18 million. I had a massive 7-figure salary, a sprawling real estate portfolio, and the deep respect of the tech industry. Marcus, meanwhile, had coasted purely on his manipulative charm until reality aggressively caught up with him. He started a luxury real estate venture that completely imploded within 2 years, largely due to his severe, hidden sports gambling addiction and sheer laziness. He was drowning in massive debt, constantly dodging calls from aggressive creditors and dangerous loan sharks. But in my parents' eyes, the narrative never shifted. Every single Thanksgiving, I would arrive in my luxury car with vintage wine, and my mother would completely ignore my recent corporate awards to fawn over Marcus's latest delusional business pitch. One evening, my father cornered me in the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. "Ethan, your brother is in a rough patch," he demanded, poking his finger hard into my chest. "You are sitting on millions. You need to write him a check and clear his debts. It's what family does. We protect our own." I gripped the granite counter, my blood boiling. I had already bailed Marcus out 4 times in the past, to the tune of nearly $95,000, none of which I ever saw again. For the first time in my life, I firmly held my ground. "No, Dad, I am not funding his underground gambling addiction anymore. I offered him a senior management job last month, and he said the hours were beneath him. I'm done." My father's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You selfish, arrogant brat," he spat. "You care more about your bank account than your own blood." I drove home that night feeling utterly, profoundly alienated. I was so incredibly desperate for a real family, for someone who loved me for me, not for my net worth. That deep, aching, pathetic vulnerability was exactly what Chloe smelled when she walked into my life. I met Chloe at a high-profile charity gala in Vancouver. She was an art curator, devastatingly beautiful, wearing a simple but incredibly elegant emerald evening gown. She had this supernatural ability to make you feel like you were the absolute center of the universe. We talked for 4 straight hours in the corner of the ballroom. I opened up about the intense stress of being a CEO and the toxic, agonizing dynamic with my family. She listened with deep, soulful eyes, reached across the table, took my hand, and whispered exactly what I had spent 30 years dying to hear. "You don't deserve to be treated like an ATM, Ethan. You deserve to be someone's first priority. I would fiercely protect you." I fell hard, fast, and completely blind. Within a year, we were married in a lavish $300,000 ceremony at a private botanical garden. Marcus was my best man, smiling perfectly for the expensive cameras, giving a toast that brought tears to the crowd. I thought I had finally won. I thought I had built my own sanctuary. But the cracks in the perfect foundation started showing shortly after our honeymoon. Chloe, who had initially been so fiercely supportive of my strict boundaries with my family, suddenly became incredibly close with Marcus. I would come home from exhausting days at the office to find them sitting close together on our expensive leather sofa, drinking my imported scotch. Their voices would drop to a sudden, guilty hush, the absolute second I walked through the door. When I confronted her, Chloe would stroke my hair and coo smoothly, "I'm just keeping the peace, honey. You know how erratic your brother is. I'm just letting him vent so you don't have to deal with the stress. I'm protecting you." I bought it because I desperately wanted the illusion of a perfect wife. Then came the financial maneuvers. Chloe introduced me to Vance, a slick, high-end estate lawyer she claimed was an old family friend. Vance invited us to his sprawling downtown office and relentlessly pressured me to take out a massive life insurance policy. "Given your net worth and your plans to have children with Chloe, you are acting irresponsibly, Ethan," Vance argued smoothly, sliding a dense stack of legal documents across his mahogany desk. "If anything tragic happens, the company could be tied up in messy probate court. The board could push Chloe out. She needs immediate liquid cash to protect your assets." They pushed for a $6.5 million policy. Chloe played the reluctant, grieving in advance wife perfectly, crying perfectly timed tears about how much she hated thinking about losing me. I signed the papers. Chloe was the sole primary beneficiary, and at Vance's aggressive suggestion, Marcus was named as a secondary trustee to assist her with managing the complex estate. A month after the ink dried, Chloe surprised me with a trip to the remote Canadian Rockies in British Columbia. She framed it as a much-needed romantic getaway to disconnect from the tech world. She booked a luxury wilderness lodge and an exclusive, highly rated private helicopter tour over the remote glaciers. But exactly 2 days before the trip, Chloe suddenly came down with a severe, debilitating flu. She was bedridden, running a fever, and insisting I still go. "Take Marcus," she croaked from beneath our down duvet, clutching a tissue. "You guys have been so distant. You need to bond. Please. Ethan. Do it for me." My gut screamed at me. Every survival instinct I had honed in the cutthroat business world told me something was fundamentally wrong. But this was my wife. This was my brother. You don't look at the people you love and see cold-blooded murderers. I packed my heavy winter bags and flew to British Columbia with Marcus, completely blind to the fact that I was walking straight into a meticulously planned slaughterhouse. The air in the Rockies was crisp, biting, and terrifyingly pure. The mountains loomed like ancient, unforgiving gods, covered in permanent blue ice and surrounded by millions of acres of unbroken, silent pine forests. There is absolutely no cell service. There is no quick rescue. It is nature at its most lethal. We arrived at the remote helipad early in the morning. Marcus was unusually quiet, bouncing nervously on his heels, his eyes darting around the landing strip. Our pilot was a gruff local named Harris. We climbed into the glass-bubbled cabin of the chopper and took off, soaring over the breathtaking icy terrain. For the first 20 minutes, I actually felt a rare moment of genuine peace. But Marcus wasn't looking at the scenery. He was staring intensely at the back of the pilot's head, his jaw clenched tight. Suddenly, Harris's voice crackled sharply through the intercom. "Got a warning light flashing on the fuel pressure manifold. Nothing major, but protocol says I need to set her down on that clear ridge up ahead and do a quick visual check." He banked the helicopter sharply and landed roughly on a remote, jagged, snow-dusted ridge that dropped off instantly into a massive, heavily forested valley thousands of feet below. The rotors remained spinning, creating a deafening roar and kicking up a blinding storm of icy wind. Harris popped his door open, stepped into the freezing gale, and walked around to the tail, disappearing entirely from our line of sight. Marcus immediately unbuckled his heavy safety harness. "Let's get a photo near the edge," he shouted over the deafening rotors, pointing frantically to the sliding side door. "The view down into the valley is insane. Come on. Chloe would love a picture of us." At the mention of my wife, I smiled. I unbuckled my harness, slid the heavy door open, and leaned toward the open doorway, pulling my smartphone from my jacket. The freezing wind whipped my face. I looked out over the terrifying, dizzying drop. The tops of the pine trees looked like tiny green needles thousands of feet below. "It's a hell of a long way down," I yelled back over my shoulder. I felt Marcus step up very close behind me. I expected him to put his arm around my shoulder for the selfie. Instead, I felt 2 open palms plant themselves flat, hard, and violently against my shoulder blades. I turned my head, deeply confused, my brain failing to process the physical sensation of being pushed. I locked eyes with my brother. All the charm, all the fake smiles were completely gone. His face was a mask of cold, calculating, psychopathic hatred. "You have always been in the way, little brother," Marcus whispered. Because of the noise-canceling headsets we were still wearing, the microphone picked up his voice perfectly. It was crystal clear in my ears. Chloe says goodbye. He shoved me with every single ounce of strength he possessed. My hands scrambled frantically for purchase on the smooth, freezing metal frame of the door, but my winter gloves slipped instantly. I fell backward into the open abyss. The last thing I saw before I tumbled into the terrifying freefall was Marcus reaching out to casually slide the helicopter door shut, turning his back on me before I even disappeared into the clouds. Time does not compress into a neat little highlight reel when you are falling from a helicopter. It slows down into a grueling, agonizing crawl. The wind violently tore at my clothes, ripping the breath right out of my lungs so fiercely I couldn't even scream. I saw the jagged, unforgiving peaks rushing up to greet me. My brain fired in a chaotic frenzy, trying to reconcile the horrific reality with the illusion I had lived in. My brother. My wife. The two pillars of my existence. Then came the impact. I hit the upper branches of a massive, ancient evergreen tree. Thick wooden limbs, some as wide as my waist, whipped across my face and torso, snapping like dry matchsticks under my falling weight. Those branches tore my flesh, shredded my thermal jacket, and shattered my ribs with a series of sickening cracks. But they also acted as a brutal series of brakes, slowing my terminal descent just enough to keep my internal organs from bursting. I crashed through the dense canopy and hit the frozen forest floor with a wet, heavy thud. The world exploded into a blinding flash of white pain. My left femur snapped instantly. The sound of my largest bone breaking in half echoed in the silent woods, louder than a shotgun blast. I blacked out instantly. Update 1. When I finally came to, the pain wasn't just a physical sensation, it was a living, breathing entity sitting on my crushed chest. I tasted the distinct metallic flavor of copper. I tried to move my arm, and a wave of nausea washed over me so intensely that I vomited bile into the freezing dirt. My clothes were soaked completely through with my own warm blood, rapidly cooling in the harsh Canadian air. I lay there staring up through the gaping hole I had broken in the tree canopy. The blue sky was gone, replaced by the deep, bruised purple of twilight. As the physical shock wore off, the psychological horror truly set in. Marcus, the man whose scraped knees I had bandaged when we were kids, had looked me in the eye and pushed me into the void. And Chloe, my elegant, beautiful Chloe, the woman who whispered in the dark about building a legacy and growing old together, had known. Marcus's parting words made that undeniably clear. Chloe says goodbye. They had planned this together. They had probably laid in my bed, drinking my wine, calculating the exact trajectory of my death. A primal, burning rage ignited deep in my gut, erupting into a roaring inferno that pushed back against the agony of my shattered leg. I realized I was entirely, fundamentally alone. There would be no immediate rescue team because Marcus would undoubtedly lie to the authorities about where I fell. They wanted a body eventually to cash in on the $6.5 million, but they needed me dead and frozen first. If I surrendered to the cold, they won. They would take my company, my money, and my life, and they would drink expensive champagne over my empty grave. I gripped the frozen soil until my fingernails bled and made a solemn promise to the silent forest. I will not die here. I would bring down a reckoning so fierce it would shake the very foundation of their lives. Surviving the initial fall was only the first 5 seconds of a grueling, horrific 4-day nightmare. Day 1 was entirely about shock and adrenaline. I fashioned a crude, agonizing splint from a sturdy branch and my leather belt, screaming into the dirt with every inch I moved. I dragged myself by my elbows under the thick overhang of a fallen tree to shield myself from the biting wind. The pain in my leg caused me to hallucinate flashes of light. If the jagged edge of the broken bone pierced my femoral artery, I would bleed to death in minutes. I bit down on my leather wallet until my teeth cracked, forcing myself to stay completely still. Day 2 brought the fever and the desperate thirst. I was severely dehydrated, my tongue swelling like a dry sponge. I used my CEO mindset to survive. Assess resources and prioritize. My top priority was water. I dragged myself painfully over the rocky ground, leaving a trail of blood, to a small depression where melted snow had pooled. I drank the muddy, freezing water with cupped hands, needing fluid to keep my kidneys from shutting down. The psychological torture was worse than the physical. I hallucinated Chloe walking through our luxury home in Vancouver, laughing with Marcus, opening the massive life insurance check. The betrayal burned hotter than my fever. I was nothing but a host organism, and the parasites had decided it was time to kill me off. Day 3, I was fading rapidly. The cold was the true enemy. Hypothermia was setting in. I piled dead leaves and freezing mud over my body for insulation. I stayed awake by plotting my revenge. I designed civil and criminal lawsuits in my head. I drafted the divorce papers mentally. That pure, unadulterated hatred kept my heart beating. On day 4, my body was giving up. My vision was tunneling. I lay staring at the sky, accepting that they might actually win. Then I heard it. The unmistakable crunch of hiking boots on dry branches. I gathered every last drop of air in my fluid-filled lungs and let out a guttural, desperate scream that tore my raw throat. The footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" A woman's voice called out. Moments later, two faces appeared over the ridge. Maya and David, a young couple on a deep backcountry hiking trip. When Maya saw me, she dropped her pack in absolute horror. I looked like a corpse, covered in dried blood and swollen beyond recognition. David rushed forward, pulling a bulky satellite phone from his vest. "Hang on, man. We're getting a medevac." I grabbed David's jacket with a weak, bloody hand, pulling him close. I refused to let the truth die in this forest. "My name is Ethan," I gasped, every word slicing my throat. "My brother pushed me from a helicopter 4 days ago. He and my wife are trying to kill me for the insurance money. Do not call the local police. Call the provincial bureau." They lied. I passed out before the chopper arrived. I woke up to the harsh, blinding, sterile lights of an intensive care unit in Vancouver. My entire left leg was immobilized in a massive cast held up by a complex traction pulley system. My chest was wrapped tightly, and 4 tubes snaked out of my arms. A woman in a sharp gray suit holding a leather folder stepped into the room, flashing a silver badge. "I am Detective Hayes with the Provincial Bureau of Investigation," she said calmly. "According to the hospital records, you are John Doe. I deliberately kept your real name out of the system. If what you told those hikers is true, the people who did this cannot know you are alive." "Not yet," I nodded slowly. "It is true. Every word. My brother pushed me. My wife planned it." Over the next 3 days, while I underwent excruciating surgeries to pin my shattered femur back together with titanium rods, Detective Hayes and I turned my hospital room into a secure war room. I gave her full, unrestricted access to my personal bank accounts, my company emails, my digital estate files, and the master controls to my smart home security system. I was no longer the naive husband. I was a CEO handling a hostile takeover of my life, and I was going to crush the opposition with extreme prejudice. The first massive piece of the puzzle fell into place when Hayes showed me the official search and rescue reports. "Your brother reported your fall 3 hours after the helicopter landed," she explained. "He claimed you leaned out too far, lost your balance, and slipped. But here is the kicker, Ethan. He gave the authorities GPS coordinates that were 50 miles away from the valley where you actually fell. They have been searching the completely wrong sector for 4 days. They officially called off the search this morning due to an incoming blizzard. Officially, you are presumed dead." Then came the home security footage. I had installed a hidden, motion-activated nanny cam in our kitchen a year ago because we suspected a contractor was stealing tools. I never told Chloe about it. Hayes accessed the cloud storage and handed me her tablet. The timestamp was from 2 days ago, the day after I was supposed to have tragically died. The high-def video showed Chloe and Marcus standing in my custom marble kitchen. Chloe was wearing a silk robe I bought her for our anniversary. Marcus poured 2 glasses of my most expensive vintage champagne. To the grieving widow, Marcus smirked, clinking his glass against hers. To 6 and a million reasons to smile, Chloe laughed, a sound so utterly callous and evil it made my stomach physically churn. She leaned in, grabbed the lapels of his shirt, and kissed my brother, a long, passionate, deeply familiar kiss. My wife and my brother weren't just accomplices, they were lovers. They sat at my kitchen island and opened a laptop. "Vance says the insurance company will expedite the payout given the tragic circumstances," Chloe said. "The death certificate is being fast-tracked without the body since Marcus is an eyewitness and the pilot corroborated the accident. Vance has the judge in his pocket." "And my debt?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp and desperate. "Relax." Chloe rolled her eyes. "I will wire the bookies their money the second the insurance clears. You'll be clear of the mob, Marcus. We just have to play the devastated family for a few more days." I handed the tablet back to Detective Hayes. My hands were terrifyingly steady. The hot anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, absolute zero focus. Chloe planned my murder to get the inheritance and the insurance specifically to pay off Marcus's massive underground gambling debts. And Vance, my trusted lawyer, was manipulating the legal system to bypass the mandatory waiting periods for a cut of the money. "We have them," Hayes said quietly. "Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, wire fraud. We can send a SWAT team to your house right now." "No," I said, my voice raspy but filled with dark resolve. "Arresting them quietly in their pajamas isn't enough. I want a public execution of their reputations. I want them to have the highest possible height to fall from." "They are holding a memorial service for you this Saturday," Hayes noted, checking her phone. "An empty casket funeral. High society event. Your parents, the company board, the press, everyone will be there." A dark, hollow smile crept across my bruised, stitched face. "Detective, I need you to help me get a tailored black suit and a very sturdy cane. I wouldn't miss my own funeral for the world." Update 2. Pushing a completely shattered femur out of a hospital bed just days after major reconstructive surgery requires a level of sheer willpower I didn't know I possessed. The medical staff in Vancouver vehemently opposed my plan, warning me of massive blood clots and permanent nerve damage. I looked the head of orthopedic surgery dead in the eye, and told him if he didn't sign my discharge papers, I would rip the IVs out of my arms and crawl out. Detective Hayes understood that some wounds require absolute, immediate justice to heal. Before leaving the secure facility, I made one highly encrypted phone call to Sarah, the chief operating officer of my tech company. She was my most trusted, fiercely loyal ally. When she answered, her voice was raw with genuine grief. When I quietly told her I was alive, she dropped her phone on the hardwood floor and began sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't have time to comfort her. I gave Sarah ruthless instructions. Lock down every single corporate account, freeze all executive stock options, and build an impenetrable digital fortress to prevent Chloe or Vance from accessing the company's operational funds. Chloe arrogantly assumed she was about to inherit total control of my life's work. Sarah ensured that the absolute second Chloe tried to touch my company, she would hit a reinforced brick wall. The morning of my funeral was aggressively grim. The Vancouver sky was a heavy blanket of dark gray clouds pouring torrential rain. Detective Hayes brought a professional forensic makeup artist who added theatrical age to my features, darkened my hair with temporary dye, applied pale foundation to mask my bruises, and handed me thick tortoiseshell glasses. I wore a tailored black suit that hung loosely on my emaciated frame and leaned heavily on a solid oak medical cane. My left leg was encased in a rigid brace hidden beneath wide-cut trousers. I looked exactly like a distant, elderly uncle. No one at high society funerals looks closely at obscure strangers. They are too busy performing their own grief. We arrived at the cathedral downtown an hour early, parking across the street in an armored, heavily tinted police SUV. From this secure vantage point, I had a front row seat to the sickest theatrical production of my life. Guests arrived in droves. Then, I saw my parents. My mother stepped out of a town car wearing a pristine designer morning dress, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a lace handkerchief for the cameras. My father walked beside her, puffing his chest out to play the stoic patriarch. They secretly thrived on the intense wave of sympathy. But the true visceral gut punch came 10 minutes later. A gleaming, brand new midnight black Porsche Panamera pulled up to the VIP zone. Out stepped Chloe. She wore a breathtakingly expensive custom-fitted black dress and a delicate veil. She looked every inch the tragically heartbroken widow. And stepping out of the passenger side was Marcus, wearing a custom suit I had paid for 3 years ago. He placed a highly possessive hand on the small of her back. She leaned deeply into him, painting a perfect picture of a shattered woman relying on her late husband's devoted brother. She had bought a Porsche before my broken body was even supposedly recovered. She was parading my attempted murderer in front of my closest friends, disguising their blood-soaked affair as innocent support. "Look at them," I whispered to Detective Hayes, gripping my oak cane until the wood creaked. "They honestly think they just won the lottery." Hayes tapped her earpiece. "My tactical officers are in position. All exits are covered. The AV technician running the soundboard inside is one of our undercover guys. The encrypted USB drive is loaded. We move when you give the signal, Ethan." I pushed the heavy car door open and stepped into the freezing rain. Every step sent a massive shockwave of white-hot pain shooting up my shattered femur, but the physical agony was completely muted by the icy rage freezing my blood. We slipped into the church through a side entrance just as the heavy organ music began. The sanctuary was packed to capacity. Over 300 people had shown up to mourn a man who was standing silently in the shadows of the back row. At the very front, elevated on a platform surrounded by elaborate floral arrangements, was an elegant, polished mahogany casket. It was completely empty. I watched the minister speak in soft, practiced tones about the fragility of life, reading from a carefully curated script Chloe and Vance had paid for. Then, Chloe walked slowly up to the pulpit. She adjusted the microphone and took a deep, shuddering breath, a masterful performance. "Ethan was my entire world," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "When you find a love that deep, you never imagine letting it go. Ethan worked tirelessly to build a wonderful life for us, to ensure our family would always be provided for." She wasn't just giving a eulogy, she was subtly reminding the room of my massive wealth, firmly establishing her narrative as the rightful heir to my empire. "My only comfort," Chloe continued, wiping a non-existent tear, "is that Ethan was doing what he loved, and he was with his brother, Marcus. I know Ethan looked up to Marcus more than anyone else." The audacity made my vision blur with red-hot anger. Chloe stepped down, and Marcus took the podium. He gripped the heavy wooden stand, bowing his head dramatically. "I lost my best friend on that mountain," Marcus said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "When he slipped from that icy ridge, a massive part of my soul fell with him. I tried to reach him, I swear to God. I tried to grab his hand, but the wind was too strong. I will carry this crushing guilt forever." He looked directly at my parents in the front row. "But I promise you, Ethan, I will take care of Chloe. I will fiercely protect your legacy. Rest in peace, little brother." The church was completely silent, save for the muffled sounds of people crying. It was the perfect, highly profitable ending they had spent weeks writing. It was time for me to rewrite the script. I stepped out from the protective dark shadows of the back row directly into the center aisle. The heavy solid rubber tip of my oak cane struck the polished stone floor. I took a slow, agonizing step forward. The metal hinges of my leg brace locked into place with a sharp click. Whack! Click! The sound was rhythmic and entirely unnatural in the quiet church. A few people turned their heads, annoyed by the interruption. I ignored them. I reached up and pulled the tortoiseshell glasses off my face, dropping them onto an empty pew. Polite, hushed whispers began to ripple through the crowd. People were starting to recognize the sharp angle of my jaw, the specific color of my hair, the distinct way I carried my shoulders despite the heavy limp. I saw Sarah, my COO, sitting in the fourth row. She stood up abruptly, tears of absolute shock welling in her eyes. I gave her a microscopic nod. She sank back into her seat with a fierce, triumphant smile. The low murmurs rapidly escalated into loud, agitated gasps. The minister stepped back from the pulpit, his eyes wide with profound shock. Marcus was the very first person at the front of the church to turn around. I will never, for as long as I live, forget the exact look on his face. It was as if the devil himself had just crawled out of the earth. The color instantly drained from Marcus's face, leaving his skin a sickening translucent gray. His jaw went entirely slack. The confident, grieving brother vanished, replaced entirely by a terrified, cornered rat. Chloe turned next. She froze completely solid. The expensive veil could not hide the sheer, unadulterated terror exploding in her wide eyes. She gripped the wooden pew so hard her knuckles turned stark white, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. "Hello, Marcus," I said. My voice was raspy, damaged from the intubation tube and the screaming in the wilderness, but it carried through the cavernous church perfectly, cutting through the murmurs like a newly sharpened blade. "I am so incredibly sorry I am late." The traffic coming back from the Rockies was absolutely brutal this time of year. Absolute chaos erupted. My mother screamed a piercing, hysterical sound. My father shot up, pointing a violently shaking finger at me, unable to articulate a single word. Dozens of people stood up all at once, heavy wooden chairs scraping against the stone floor. Flashbulbs from local reporters in the back started going off. "Ethan?" Someone yelled frantically. "Is that really Ethan?" I kept my eyes locked exclusively on Chloe and Marcus as I closed the remaining distance, stopping just 10 feet away from my empty mahogany casket. "What is this?" Marcus stammered, taking a clumsy step backward, nearly tripping over the altar steps. "This is a trick. You fell. I saw you fall off that ridge." "You didn't see me fall, Marcus," I said, my voice cold and hard as forged steel. "You felt me fall. You felt the heavy weight of my body leave your hands when you violently shoved me out of that helicopter." Loud, horrified gasps echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Several people physically recoiled. Chloe shook her head frantically, stepping in front of Marcus. Even now, cornered, she was desperately trying to adapt her psychological manipulation. "Ethan, oh my dear God, you are alive," she cried out, pitching her voice up and throwing her arms open, rushing toward me with tears streaming down her face. "It's a miracle. You're severely traumatized. You hit your head. You're hallucinating." Marcus tried to save your life. She reached out to grab my shoulders. I raised my heavy oak cane and pointed the solid brass handle directly at her chest, stopping her dead in her tracks inches from me. "Do not touch me," I growled, the pure venom in my voice freezing her in place. "Do not ever put your lying, filthy hands on me again." I lowered the cane and turned to the front pew where Vance, my highly paid estate lawyer, was sitting. He was sweating profusely, frantically loosening his expensive silk tie. "And Vance," I called out, raising my voice so the entire congregation could hear, "how is the probate paperwork coming along? Did you manage to bribe the judge and expedite the massive payout? Because I have a strong feeling the Federal Insurance Board might want to have a serious word with you about wire fraud." Vance stood up quickly, paler than a sheet. "Ethan, I assure you, I have no idea what you are talking about. I was acting on behalf of your grieving widow. My hands are clean." "You were acting on behalf of a guaranteed 10% cut of my blood money," I shot back, silencing him instantly. I looked up past the crowd toward the sound booth in the upper balcony. I gave a sharp, deliberate nod. The undercover police officer hit play on the console. The massive high-fidelity speakers of the church crackled aggressively to life. It wasn't organ music. It was the harsh, windy, incredibly loud audio directly recovered from the helicopter's hidden dashcam. The entire congregation fell terrifyingly silent as the deafening sound of chopping rotors filled the sanctuary. Then, Marcus's voice, amplified to rock concert volumes, boomed through the church, clear as a bell over the wind. "You have always been in the way, little brother. Chloe says goodbye." The horrific sound of my violent, terrified scream as I was pushed into the freefall echoed next, followed immediately by the heavy metallic thud of the helicopter door sliding shut. The silence that followed in that church was absolute, suffocating, and terrifying. You could have heard a pin drop. Chloe's legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the wooden pew, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Her entire perfectly constructed, highly lucrative world had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of the entire Vancouver elite. Marcus looked wildly around the room, his chest heaving, desperately searching for an exit. But Detective Hayes was already walking purposefully down the center aisle, holding her silver badge high in the air. 6 heavily armed uniformed police officers stepped out from the side corridors, completely blocking every single door in the sanctuary. "Marcus," I said softly, stepping closer to my trembling brother. "You pushed me into a frozen forest to die. I survived on muddy water and pure, unadulterated hatred for 4 agonizing days with a shattered leg. You severely underestimated my will to live." I turned to my wife. She slowly looked up at me, her expensive mascara running down her face in ugly, thick black streaks. "I saw the kitchen security footage, Chloe. I watched you drink my expensive champagne and passionately kiss my brother 24 hours after you thought I was a frozen corpse. I watched you plan to use my inheritance to pay off his illegal gambling debts to the mob. You didn't want a husband. You wanted a human ATM. And when you maxed out your withdrawals, you tried to smash the machine." Detective Hayes stepped up beside me, pulling heavy steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. "Chloe, Marcus, Vance," Hayes's voice boomed with authority. "You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree insurance fraud, and federal wire fraud. Put your hands behind your backs immediately." The officers moved in swiftly. Marcus panicked and tried to pull away, babbling incoherently about how the audio was faked using AI. 2 officers grabbed him, slammed him face first onto the polished mahogany lid of my empty casket, violently wrenching his arms behind his back and snapping the heavy cuffs onto his wrists. Chloe didn't fight at all. She just sobbed a pathetic, hollow sound as the cold steel clamped around her delicate wrists. Vance was red as rights as he slumped against the wall in total defeat, knowing his legal career and his life were entirely over. The church was in an unprecedented uproar as the police roughly hauled them out through the double doors to the waiting fleet of squad cars. Guests were hyperventilating, cell phones were out recording the chaos. Sarah aggressively pushed her way through the stunned crowd toward me, bringing a bottle of cold water and a fiercely protective glare. But the nightmare wasn't completely over. The deep-rooted poison of my family dynamic ran much deeper than just Marcus's greed. As I turned slowly to leave the altar, exhausted and running on pure adrenaline, my parents intentionally intercepted me. Arthur and Helen physically blocked my path down the aisle. Their faces were flushed a frantic red. I genuinely expected them to fall to their knees, to cry tears of profound relief that I had miraculously survived. I expected them to ask about my shattered leg. Instead, my mother lunged forward and grabbed the lapels of my suit jacket, shaking me weakly. "Ethan, what in God's name have you done?" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly. "Tell them it is a mistake. You have to tell the police to let him go right now." I stared at her, profoundly stunned. "Mom. He just tried to murder me. You literally just heard the tape of him saying goodbye before pushing me out of an aircraft. He was desperate." My father roared, aggressively stepping into my personal space, his eyes blazing with that toxic authority he had used to control me my entire life. "He owes a massive amount of money to very dangerous people, Ethan. He was pushed into a corner. You have millions sitting in the bank. You could have just paid his debts when I asked you to. You forced him into this desperate situation. If you press charges, he will go to federal prison for decades. You will completely ruin his life." I looked back and forth between the 2 people who brought me into this world. They were actively blaming my financial success, my hard work, and my refusal to be extorted for my older brother's murderous actions. The realization hit me with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. But miraculously, it didn't hurt. It freed me. The very last rusted chain binding me to this toxic family snapped in half and turned to dust. "His life was ruined the exact moment you taught him his horrific actions have no consequences," I said, my voice eerily calm. I forcefully peeled my mother's clutching hands off my jacket, dropping her wrists as if they were diseased. I looked my father dead in the eye, refusing to shrink away. "Marcus made his choice when he pushed me. Chloe made hers when she planned it. And you too are making yours right now. If you ever contact me again, if you ever come near my home or my company, I will have my corporate lawyers file a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin." I turned my back on them and walked slowly out of the church, leaning heavily on my cane, with Sarah walking right beside me like a bodyguard. I never spoke a single word to Arthur and Helen again. The legal fallout over the next year was swift, brutal, and highly publicized. When cowardly criminals realize the ship is sinking, they inevitably turn on each other like starving dogs. The criminal trial was an absolute media circus. I sat in the front row of the gallery every single day, wearing a sharp custom suit, watching the architects of my pain completely crumble. Chloe's high-priced defense attorney tried a desperate strategy to paint her as a battered, terrified wife, manipulated by Marcus's violent tendencies. Marcus's overworked public defender threw Chloe right under the bus, claiming she was the evil mastermind who seduced Marcus and threatened to expose their affair if he didn't comply. The jury saw right through the pathetic lies. The helicopter dashcam audio, the massive financial wire transfers Vance had illegally prepared, and the undeniable kitchen security footage were irrefutable. It took the jury less than 3 hours to deliberate. The judge handed down the maximum allowable sentences. Marcus received 25 years in a maximum security federal prison for attempted murder in the first degree. Chloe received 20 years for conspiracy and severe wire fraud. Vance, despite taking a cowardly plea deal, still caught 15 years and was permanently disbarred. When the bailiff placed the steel handcuffs on Chloe to lead her away, her glamorous beauty was completely gone. Her hair was stringy and unwashed, her eyes hollow and exhausted. She looked back at me and mouthed the word "I'm sorry." I didn't blink, I didn't nod. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the courtroom. Her apology was meaningless noise to a man who had already buried her memory deep in the frozen dirt of the Canadian Rockies. Healing from profound, deeply intimate betrayal is not a simple linear process. It is a lingering ghost that haunts your quietest moments. For the first full year after the trial, I struggled immensely. I officially filed the divorce papers, sold the massive house Chloe and I had shared, and bought a highly secure minimalist penthouse downtown. I elevated Sarah to co-CEO because I realized she was the only person who had demonstrated unwavering loyalty. But I couldn't sleep. Night after night, I woke up screaming, drenched in cold sweat, vividly feeling the terrifying sensation of falling through the thin mountain air. I finally started seeing Dr. Keller, a trauma specialist who dealt with severe PTSD. I sat in his leather chair twice a week, painstakingly unpacking 34 years of severe emotional neglect and the profound trauma of a helicopter drop. "You are trying to rationalize the irrational, Ethan," Dr. Keller told me gently. "You cannot control the darkness in other people. You can only control the impenetrable boundaries you build to keep that darkness out." Learning to build healthy, uncompromising boundaries saved my life the second time around. The federal insurance company voided the policy, and I filed a massive civil lawsuit against Vance's law firm for extreme malpractice, completely liquidating his remaining assets. It was at a charity fundraiser a year later that I finally met Maya. She was a brilliant architect who was fiercely independent and possessed a quiet, steady strength. I was brutally honest with her from day one about my past, my scars, and my absolute zero-tolerance policy for manipulation. Sometimes, I think about Marcus sitting in a concrete cell, stripped entirely of his charm and his golden status. I think about Chloe, aging rapidly in a high-security prison without a single dime to her name. I think about my parents living in their desperately empty house, utterly cut off from the only successful son they had left, drowning in the shame of their public disgrace. And I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. I didn't just survive the fall, I conquered the impact. My brother's girlfriend planted drugs in my room and framed me. I was arrested and kicked out by my own mother. I, a 21-year-old male, need to get this off my chest because my life has entirely fallen apart over the last month. My younger brother, Patrick, a 19-year-old male, has always been the golden kid in our family. But what he did to me was beyond what I could have anticipated. Let us first examine our family dynamics. Our parents split when I was 12 and Patrick was 10. Our father relocated across the nation for work, so we only see him on holidays. Our mother, Rosa, 45, works 2 jobs to support us. She works during the day as a nurse at the local hospital and at night as an office cleaner. She is usually fatigued, so Patrick and I had to rely on each other growing up. Our mother has always been really strict with both of us in terms of academic performance. She came here from Colombia when she was young and never finished college since she had me so early. She is always teaching us that education is the only way to make something of ourselves. Patrick has always been a naturally bright student who excels in her role. I had to work twice as hard to achieve good grades. Even then, I usually got B's and C's. As a result, Patrick became Mom's clear favorite. She would brag about him to her friends, display his report cards on the refrigerator, and always use him as an example when lecturing me on my grades. It ached. But I understood. Patrick was actually clever, and his mother was proud. I assumed that was just the way things were. Despite this preference, Patrick and I were actually quite close. We shared a room until I was 18. And we had an underlying agreement that we were a team against the world. When Mom was working late, we'd order pizza and stay up late playing video games. When she was concerned about money, we would both contribute from our part-time jobs without her asking. Patrick would assist me with my homework, and I would drive him around because he didn't have a license yet. The situation started approximately 6 months ago, when Patrick began seeing Linda, an 18-year-old girl from his high school. She's one of those popular, attractive girls who is accustomed to receiving attention. Patrick was utterly smitten with her from the beginning. He'd spend hours on the phone with her, skip our regular hangouts, and basically base his entire schedule on her availability. I did not mind at first. Patrick had never had a significant girlfriend before, so I assumed he was just going through the honeymoon phase. But Linda started visiting our house more frequently, and I began to notice some things about her that disturbed me. She had a habit of talking down to those she thought were beneath her. She'd make passing remarks about how small our house was, or how weary Mom always looked. She would roll her eyes when her mother tried to converse with her in broken English. Patrick never seemed to notice these details, or perhaps he decided to overlook them. The true problem occurred when Linda started spending time at our house when Patrick was at work. He worked at the local grocery shop 3 afternoons a week, and she would occasionally pop up while just I was home. She used to wait in Patrick's room, but she eventually started hanging out with me in the living room. Linda is gorgeous, and she was well aware of this. She wore low-cut blouses and short shorts and sat very close to me on the couch while we watched TV. She would laugh at everything I said, even when I wasn't attempting to be amusing. She'd stroke my arm while she spoke to me and grumble about Patrick's constant work or school commitments. I was aware of what was happening, but I attempted to maintain my distance. Patrick was my brother, and I wasn't about to jeopardize that for any female, no matter how lovely she was. But Linda persisted. She started texting me to see whether I was home before she came over. She would bring me food from the areas she visited with Patrick. She'd asked me for advice on their relationship, which seemed like a trap. The breaking point happened roughly 2 months ago. Patrick was working a double shift at the store, and Linda arrived at our home at 8 p.m. Mom was working a night job, so it was just me and her. She mentioned that she was bored and wanted to hang out. We ended up watching a movie, and she kept moving closer to me on the couch. Near the end of the film, she asked me directly if I considered her beautiful. I told her she was beautiful, but she was my brother's girlfriend, and I was not interested in going down that road. She laughed and said Patrick did not need to know everything. She then kissed me. I pulled her away instantly and urged her to leave. She became agitated and claimed I was rejecting her because I thought I was too good for her. I said it had nothing to do with that. I wasn't going to betray my brother. She departed angrily, and I hoped that was the end of the matter. But Linda began acting strangely around me after that. When she came over with Patrick, she barely noticed me. She'd mutter things to Patrick, which made him look at me oddly. She began posting cryptic messages on social media about people not being who they appear, and how some people cannot be trusted. Patrick started treating me differently too. He stopped inviting me to hang out. When I tried to converse to him, he just gave me short answers. When I asked him what was wrong, he didn't say anything, but I could tell he was upset. 3 weeks ago, everything detonated. I was at my part-time work at the auto shop when my phone began to ring with calls and texts. My mother was anxiously contacting me and Patrick had sent me several nasty texts. Mom texted me that I needed to get home immediately since the cops were at our house. I went home as quickly as possible, and when I came into our house, there were 2 police cars parked outside. My mother was crying on the front porch and Patrick stood next to her, arms crossed. The officers were walking out of our house with many plastic bags. One of the officers approached me and asked for my identification. He informed me that they had gotten an anonymous tip that I was selling drugs from our home, and that they had discovered marijuana and prescription pills in my bedroom. I was extremely shocked. I told them I had no idea how those narcotics got there, but they insisted on taking me in for interrogation. At the police station, they informed me that someone had called in a tip alleging that they had purchased drugs from me several times. The caller gave specifics about our house layout and that I kept my stockpile in a shoebox under my bed. When they checked the specific spot, they discovered a bag of marijuana and approximately 20 tablets, which turned out to be stolen prescription medications. I kept saying that I'd never seen those medicines before in my life. I don't even smoke marijuana. I've always been concerned that it might jeopardize my ability to keep my job at the auto shop. But the proof was right where the anonymous caller claimed it would be. The worst part was that my mother and Patrick came to pick me up after I was freed on bond. Mom would not look at me. Patrick sat in the back car, staring out the window the entire way home. When we went to the house, Mom told me I had 24 hours to find another somewhere to live. I tried to explain to both of them that I was innocent, but Mom said the narcotics were discovered in my room, which was sufficient for her. Patrick only shook his head and expressed his disappointment in me for lying about it. He stated Linda had warned him that I had been acting strangely lately and that she feared I was doing drugs. That's when something clicked. Linda had been in our home alone several times. She knew the arrangement. She had access to my room and was now easily commenting on my odd conduct. I confronted Patrick about Linda, and he became enraged. He claimed I was attempting to blame his girlfriend for my own mistakes. He said Linda had been nothing but kind to me, and that I was ungrateful. Mom agreed with him, saying I was manipulative by attempting to shift blame to an innocent girl. I packed my belongings and left that night. I've been staying at my friend Gavin's apartment and sleeping on his couch. The criminal accusations remain unresolved, and I had to utilize my money to hire a lawyer. My mother hasn't returned my calls, and Patrick has blocked me on all social media. It pains me that I can't prove Linda planted the medicines. I can't verify she made the anonymous call. I only had my suspicions and the fact that she had access to my room. But Patrick is so consumed by his affections for her that he refuses to even contemplate the prospect. I learned from Gavin, who still speaks with Patrick on occasion, that Linda has moved on to console Patrick about having such a disappointing brother. She's been staying at our house more frequently, assisting Mom with domestic duties, and generally presenting herself as the ideal girlfriend who is supporting the family during this tough time. Meanwhile, my life is utterly shattered. I might go to jail. I have lost my family. My reputation in our small community has been shattered. And the guy I believe is to blame for everything is being honored as if he were a saint. I do not know what to do. Part of me wants to keep battling to establish my innocence, but another part of me believes I should give up and start over somewhere else. Have you ever been in a situation where someone close to you was exploited by a toxic individual? How can you prove something if you don't have any evidence? Update 1. I can't believe I'm back with an update, but something happened to change everything. For those who haven't read my initial story, Linda, my brother Patrick's girlfriend, basically destroyed my life by hiding narcotics in my room and called the police with an anonymous tip. I've been staying on my friend Gavin's couch since my mother kicked me out. The last 3 weeks have been horrible. My lawyer stated the case against me is solid because the pills were discovered exactly where the anonymous caller predicted they would be. The prosecutor has offered me a plea agreement. Admit guilt and receive probation instead of probable jail time. My lawyer recommended me to accept it, but I refused because I am innocent. Gavin has been kind about allowing me to stay with him, but I could tell it was straining his relationship with his girlfriend, Jenna. They'd have these whispered discussions in the kitchen that would end when I walked in. Jenna ultimately told me last week that I could stay for no more than 2 weeks since they needed their space back. I understood. But that meant I was running out of options quickly. I began looking for apartments that I could afford with my auto shop wages, but most places required the first month, last month, and a security deposit up front. With my legal bills, I barely had enough to cover 1 month's rent, let alone 3. I actually considered packing my car and driving to another state to start fresh. However, something unexpected occurred. Last Tuesday, I was working late at the car business when my phone called. I didn't recognize the number, yet something compelled me to answer it. Linda's voice came through on the other end. She sounded different, unsteady and frightened. She asked if we could meet somewhere and speak. I told her I had nothing to say to her, especially after she convinced my brother and mother that I was a drug dealer. She said she needed to tell me something crucial about what had happened. My first instinct was to hang up, but curiosity got the best of me. I promised to meet her in a 24-hour diner across town where no one would recognize us. She said she will be there in an hour. When I arrived at the diner, Linda was already seated in a rear booth with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked awful. Her hair was a disaster. She had black circles under her eyes and her hands were trembling. This was not the confident, manipulative girl I recall. She began talking before I even sat down. She explained that Patrick had proposed to her the night before. He didn't just propose. He devised an elaborate plan to propose at graduation in front of both families. He had spent all of his savings on a ring, and was discussing moving in together after high school. Linda claimed she panicked when he proposed. She realized she didn't want to marry Patrick and live in our small town. She had only been dating him because he was intelligent, and she thought it made her appear attractive. But the thought of being bound to him indefinitely scared her. She then began crying and stated that she needed to tell me the truth about what had transpired. She admits to planting the narcotics in my room. She claimed she stole them from her mother's medication cabinet and acquired the marijuana from a student at school. She placed the anonymous call to the police because she wanted me out of the situation. I questioned her why she would go to such extremes to get rid of me. She claimed it wasn't actually about me at all. She understood that if Patrick's family came apart, he'd have to prioritize taking care of his mother before planning their future together. She reasoned that if I was arrested and booted out, it would cause enough family upheaval to keep Patrick from considering marriage. She also admitted lying to Patrick about my coming on to her. She claimed she told him I had tried to kiss her and that I was constantly making indecent comments when he was not present. She wanted him to distrust me so that when the drug incident occurred, he would not question it. I sat there in full disbelief as I heard this revelation. This girl had ruined my life as part of a grand scheme to avoid marrying my brother. I inquired why she was telling me this now. She claimed Patrick had been talking about the wedding non-stop since he proposed, and the guilt was eating her alive. She also stated that her mother had spotted the missing pills and threatened to contact the police if Linda did not admit to taking them. She was afraid she'd get arrested herself. I asked her whether she was willing to tell the truth to Patrick and my mother. She said she would, but she expected something in exchange. She wanted me to assist convince Patrick not to hate her when the truth was revealed. She said she genuinely cared about him and didn't want him to believe she was a monster. I almost laughed at her plea. She had literally tried to put me in prison, ruined my connection with my family, and cost me thousands of dollars in legal bills. And now she wants me to help her deal with her breakup with my brother. But then I realized, this was my chance to reclaim my life. I promised her I'd think about helping her work things out with Patrick. But first, she had to go to the police and admit to planting the pills. I also wanted her to tell my mother and Patrick the truth in person, not over the phone. She offered to meet me at the police station the next day. I didn't trust her, so I insisted on picking her up myself to ensure she showed up. The following morning, I traveled to Linda's residence. She was waiting outside with a small luggage, and she appeared to have not slept all night. On the way to the police station, she kept asking me what I expected Patrick to do when he found out. I told her honestly that he would probably never forgive her, but that was the result of her actions. Linda went to the police station and wanted to speak with the investigator who had handled my case. She confessed to planting the narcotics and filing a fraudulent report. The detective asked her to write and sign a thorough statement. He said the charges against me will be dropped within a few days. Linda asked if we might meet with my mother and Patrick after we left the police station. I contacted my mother and informed her that I was coming over with Linda and that she needed to hear something important. Mom seemed perplexed, but decided to let us come over. When we arrived at my house, Patrick and Mom were both sitting at the kitchen table waiting for us. Patrick seemed angry to see me, and Mom appeared fatigued. Linda sat across from them and explained everything. The drugs, the anonymous call, and the lies about my sexual advances on her. All of it. Patrick's face went through around 5 different emotions as Linda spoke. First came confusion, then amazement, rage, hurt, and ultimately a blank expression as if he was shutting down. Mom merely kept shaking her head and saying, "I can't believe it." Patrick asked Linda why she would do such a terrible thing to his family once she had finished talking. She tried to explain that she felt stuck and didn't want to marry, but he cut her off. He told her to go and not contact him again. After Linda had departed, Mom hugged me and apologized for not believing me. She claimed she felt bad about kicking me out and that I could move back home immediately. Patrick apologized too, but I could tell he was more upset with himself for being duped than sorry for doubting me. I returned home that weekend. The accusations were officially dismissed, and my lawyer indicated that I might be able to collect part of my legal bills from Linda's family. Patrick had definitely broken up with Linda, and he buried himself in his schoolwork to avoid dealing with his emotions. But, here's the deal. Even if the truth has been revealed and my name has been cleared, things are not back to normal. Patrick seldom speaks to me. He seems cordial but aloof, as if he is embarrassed by the entire event. Mom tries to pretend as if everything is fine, but there is an uneasiness between us that was not present before. I believe Patrick feels dumb for being duped by Linda, and seeing me reminds him of how terribly he misread the situation. I also believe he is processing the idea that his girlfriend was willing to destroy his family in order to avoid marrying him, which must have been quite damaging to his self-esteem. Linda has obviously left town. Patrick learned from someone at school that she had moved in with relatives in another state. I hope I never see her again, but a part of me wonders whether she may try to cause more difficulties in the future. For the time being, all I'm focusing on is rebuilding my life and ties with family. It will take time, but at least the truth is now out there. Update 2. Another update because the matter has somehow become much more convoluted. Linda, my brother's ex-girlfriend, falsely accused me of drug peddling. I was arrested. My family has disowned me. She eventually admitted the truth. I assumed that was the end of it, but I was mistaken. Things were slowly returning to normal at home. Patrick was still acting strangely around me, but Mom and I were repairing our connection. After being home for approximately a month, something happened that changed everything again. On a Saturday morning I was working at the auto shop when an elderly woman came in and specifically asked for me. She introduced herself as Olivia, Linda's mother. I'd never met her before, but I knew her from the images Linda had given us. Olivia seemed quite unhappy and requested if we could speak privately. My supervisor allowed me to take a break and we sat in her car outside the business. She informed me that Linda had been lying about far more than simply the pills. Olivia claims Linda had been stealing from her for months before the event with me occurred. Olivia's purse money, prescriptions, and even some of her jewelry had gone missing. Olivia suspected Linda but couldn't prove it until Linda admitted to the police that she had framed me. However, that wasn't the worst part. Olivia claimed that once Linda moved up with her relatives in Nevada, she began phoning Olivia wanting money. Linda claimed she was pregnant with Patrick baby and required financial assistance. Olivia sent her $2,000 before becoming suspicious and contacting the relatives Linda was allegedly residing with. Linda had never been pregnant. She had been spending the money on parties with new acquaintances in Las Vegas. When Olivia confronted her about it, Linda admitted the pregnancy was bogus but claimed she deserved the money as restitution for having to leave her community due to the mess I had caused. Olivia called because she thought I should know Linda was continuing lying about our family and attempting to obtain money by using Patrick's name. She also wanted to tell me that Linda had been posting messages on social media about how she was the true victim in our scenario. I checked Linda's social media profiles that night, and Olivia was correct. Linda had rewritten the entire narrative online. According to her writings, I had been bothering her for months, making unwelcome advances and threatening her when she turned me down. She stated she only lied to the police because she was afraid of what I would do to her. She presented herself as a valiant victim who had finally escaped an oppressive situation. The post received dozens of comments from people I didn't know, calling me various names and suggesting I should be imprisoned. Linda also shared images of herself looking sad and vulnerable, with words about starting afresh after overcoming tragedy. I screenshotted everything and showed it to Patrick. He was furious when he realized what Linda had posted. He hadn't used social media since their breakup, so he had no idea she was still spreading lies about our family. Patrick decided to phone Linda and tell her about the bogus pregnancy narrative and social media posts. I was present when he made the call, and he turned it on speaker so that I could hear. Linda answered the first ring, and her voice became beautiful and heartfelt when she learned it was Patrick. She informed him she had been missing him tremendously and regretted leaving town. She expressed a desire to return and resolve their differences. Patrick interrupted her and asked about the pregnancy claim and the money she had taken from her mother. Linda became defensive, claiming Olivia was lying because she was furious about Linda moving out. She insisted the pregnancy was real, but she miscarried soon after moving to Nevada. Then Patrick questioned her about the social media posts. Linda's tone abruptly shifted. She became hostile and claimed she had every right to explain her side of the tale. She claimed I had made her feel unsafe, and she was simply alerting other girls about my actions. Patrick informed her she was delusional, and that he did not want to hear from her again. Linda began crying and begged him not to hang up. She promised to stop blogging about me if he would talk to her about getting back together. Patrick informed her that she was unwell and hung up, but the harm had already been done. Linda's social media posts were shared by people in our town, and the story spread. I began receiving strange looks at work and throughout town from folks who believed Linda's version of events. My employer at the car shop summoned me to his office the following week. He stated some customers had inquired about me, and he was concerned about the shop's reputation. He did not fire me, but he made it obvious that if the drama continued to disrupt his business, he would have to let me go. That's when I knew I couldn't keep ignoring Linda's falsehoods. I had remained silent when she first confessed because I believed the truth would be sufficient, but she was still out there attempting to harm my reputation. I gathered all of my proof, including screenshots of her tweets, the police report in which she confessed, Olivia's testimony regarding the stolen money and fake pregnancy, and I made my own social media reaction describing what truly happened. I did not insult Linda personally or call her names, I simply presented the facts with documentation to back them up. I said that she admitted to placing narcotics in my room, lied to the police, and was now spreading false information online. The response was quick. People who knew me and my family began to share my post and defend me in the comments. Linda's school friends came up with their own stories of how she lied or manipulated circumstances to gain attention. Linda, however, took things to the next level. She created a new social media account and began messaging my friends and co-workers directly, sending them bogus images of text conversations in which I allegedly threatened her. The screenshots were clearly doctored. They had uneven formatting, and several of the messages used lingo that I never use. Linda's false screenshot was emailed to my mother's office. A coworker showed it to Mom, who brought it home and asked me about it. According to the phony message, I threatened Linda with violence if she returned to town. I demonstrated to Mom how the screenshot was a forgery by comparing it to real text chats on my phone. The fonts were different, and the message timestamps did not correspond with when Linda and I had actually texted. Mom believed me, but she was concerned about how far Linda was ready to go with her falsehoods. Patrick suggested we talk to a lawyer regarding Linda's harassment accusations. He felt guilty that his ex-girlfriend was still attempting to harm our family, even after the truth was revealed. Last week we spoke with a lawyer who specializes in internet harassment claims. She analyzed all of the data, and concluded that we had a strong case against Linda for defamation and cyberstalking. She further stated that Olivia may file charges for theft and fraud in connection with the phony pregnancy money. Linda received a cease and desist letter from the lawyer, requesting that she stop posting false material about me and remove all existing posts. Linda has yet to answer, although her social media profiles were made private shortly after she would have received the message. I'm hoping that this is the end of Linda's crusade against me, but I'm not holding my breath. She appears determined to present herself as the victim, regardless of the evidence to the contrary. The good news is that Patrick and I can finally talk regularly again. Working together to deal with Linda's harassment has helped us rebuild our relationship. He apologized for ever doubting me and said he felt silly for being duped by someone so manipulative. Mom has been fantastic during all of this. She feels bad about how she treated me when I was first arrested, and she has been going out of her way to make amends. She also offered to cover my legal bills in the harassment case. I'm simply tired of dealing with Linda's drama. All I want is for her to leave me and my family alone so that we can get on with our lives, but it seems like every time I think it's finished, she finds another way to cause trouble. Update 3. This is my final update because I believe the situation has reached a resolution. Linda, my brother's ex-girlfriend, falsely accused me of drug peddling. I got arrested. My family has disowned me. She eventually confessed. And then she kept bothering me online with false stories. We retained a lawyer and gave her a cease and desist letter. The cease and desist letter was effective, but not in the way we planned. Instead of just ceasing her pestering, Linda decided to push matters one last time before vanishing totally from our life. Olivia, Linda's mother, called me back about 2 weeks after the lawyer submitted the letter. She sounded worried, saying Linda had returned to our town without informing anyone. Olivia discovered out when Linda's relatives in Nevada contacted looking for her. She had allegedly stolen money and items from them before departing. Olivia was concerned about Linda's potential actions, as she appeared to be becoming increasingly desperate and reckless. She warned me to be cautious and said she was heading to our town to attempt to locate Linda and bring her home. That day, Patrick called me at work. He seemed shaken and informed me Linda had popped up on his college campus. She had managed to figure out his class schedule and was waiting for him outside his chemistry lecture. When he attempted to ignore her and go away, she began ranting at him in front of the other pupils. Linda was complaining to Patrick about how I had turned everyone against her and ruined her life. She blamed me for her family cutting her off, forcing her to leave town, and preventing her from returning. She insisted that Patrick chose between supporting her and supporting me. Patrick said he would never select her after what she had done to her family. Linda took out her phone and began recording, claiming loudly that Patrick was harassing her and that she felt unsafe. Other students gathered around to see what was going on. Linda was eventually escorted off campus by security. They told Patrick that he could make a report if he wanted, but he declined because all he wanted was for her to leave him alone. But Linda wasn't finished. That evening she shared the video she had taken on social media, claiming Patrick was part of a plan with me to silence her. The video was modified to remove the context for what she was ranting about. So it just showed Patrick appearing irritated and begging her to leave him alone. This was Linda's biggest error yet. Several kids who observed the actual fight read the post and left comments detailing what transpired. They depicted Linda as the aggressor, ranting about how I had ruined her life. One student even had their own video of the incident from a different perspective, demonstrating Linda's strange conduct. When this video was shared, it entirely contradicted Linda's story and made her appear unstable. That night, Olivia discovered Linda in a small motel on the outskirts of town. Linda had been using bogus social media accounts to watch what was said about her, and she was outraged that her plan to make Patrick appear bad had failed. Olivia persuaded Linda to meet with our lawyer to discuss resolving the matter without taking further legal action. I was suspicious, but the lawyer thought it was worth investigating because Linda was definitely spiraling and might agree to terms that would stop this forever. The meeting was held a few days later in the lawyer's office. Linda looked dreadful. She had lost weight, her hair was greasy, and she was always fidgeting with her hands. Olivia sat next to her and did the majority of the talking at first. Our lawyer presented Linda with two possibilities. She could agree to sign a legally enforceable agreement, agreeing to never contact me, Patrick, or anybody in our family again, as well as to delete all false posts about me on social media. In exchange, we agreed not to seek criminal charges for her recent harassment. If she refused, we would file charges for cyberstalking, defamation, and harassment, while Olivia would seek charges for theft and fraud relating to the phony pregnancy money. Linda originally claimed that she was the true victim, and that we were bullying her. But when the lawyer showed her all of the evidence we had gathered, including the false screenshots, conflicting social media posts, and witness testimonies from Patrick campus incident, she suddenly realized how much danger she was in. Olivia cried for most of the meeting. She kept apologizing to us, claiming she didn't know how to help her kid anymore. She claimed Linda had been engaging in manipulative conduct since she was a teenager, but it had gotten considerably worse in the last year. After approximately an hour of conversation, Linda agreed to sign the contract. She would delete all of my social media posts, stop using fake identities to track or contact anyone in our family, and leave town forever. She also had to agree to receive mental health treatment, which Olivia insisted on. Linda was required by the lawyer to write and sign a public apology post, which she had to leave on her social media platforms for 30 days before deleting them. The apology acknowledged that she had lied about me, and that all of her earlier posts were fake. Linda was plainly ashamed by having to post an apology, yet she did so. The message drew a lot of interest from people in our town who were following the situation. Many people left comments expressing their support for me and my family. Olivia returned Linda to Nevada the same day. Olivia gave me her phone number and told me to call her if Linda contacted us again. She also volunteered to pay for some of my legal fees, which was thoughtful of her. That was 2 months ago, and I have not heard from Linda since. Her social media accounts have been erased, and Patrick claims none of his pals have seen or heard from her. I occasionally check to see whether she has formed new accounts to post about me, but so far everything has been silent. My life has mostly gone back to normal. I'm still working at the car business, and my boss seems relieved that the turmoil has ended. My relationship with Patrick is the best it's been in years. Going through this experience together drew us closer. Mom has also been great. She still feels horrible about how she treated me when I was first arrested, but we've moved on. This event taught her a lesson about online abuse, and she is now more skeptical of everything she sees on social media. The only long-term effect is that I'm much more cautious about who I trust. Linda taught me that some people are willing to wreck innocent people's lives for just selfish reasons. I'm not bitter about it, but I'm more conscious of warning signs in people's conduct. I've also realized that sometimes the truth isn't enough. Even after Linda admitted to framing me, she continued to influence others online with false stories. It took legal action and enough evidence to eventually stop her. Patrick is currently dating a new girl named Lily, who appears to be truly kind and drama-free. He's taking it much slower this time and is being more cautious in introducing her to the family. I believe his experience with Linda taught him to look for character and integrity rather than being impressed by someone's appearance or popularity. Linda, on the other hand, I hope she receives the assistance she requires and ceases to cause harm. But I also want to never have to deal with her again. Some individuals are simply poisonous, and the best thing you can do is remove them from your life and keep them away. I'm thankful that my family stayed together in the end and that the truth came out. It was a horrific experience, but it might have been much worse if Linda had been more cautious about covering her tracks, or if my family had refused to listen when the evidence became evident. This entire incident taught me that while family relationships can be fragile, they can also be stronger than you realize if everyone is prepared to fight for them. Patrick and I went through hell, but we emerged stronger on the other side. My daughter, lied once, I believed her and kicked my son out. 2 years later, she needs his kidney, but he refuses to save her. I never imagined I'd write something like this, or that I'd be sitting here alone, my hands shaking, revisiting every decision I made that night, every word I screamed, and every quiet I chose to maintain. I was 38, and my spouse was 39. We had 2 children, Adrian, 18, and Isabella, 9. Despite the significant age disparity, I always assumed they loved each other, looked after each other, and were close siblings. Adrian was quiet and reserved. He enjoyed reading, staying in his room, and studying. Yet he was a good lad. He never responded to me, never caused difficulty, and never gave me any reason to distrust him. Isabella was the complete opposite, cheerful, active, a whirlwind, constantly moving and talking. And because I worked part-time and my husband spent long hours away, Adrian frequently looked after her. He would return home from college and be with her until I arrived. There were no indicators. Until that night, it was a family meal. We'd prepared spaghetti. My sister-in-law provided the wine. My nephews were playing in the living room. My husband, my children and I were all at the table, along with a couple of cousins. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. And then Isabella spoke it plainly, without drama or tears, like if the neighbor's dog had bitten her. "Adrian touched me down there," she said simply and coldly, as if she didn't realize the gravity of the situation. Everything ceased. My cousin quit speaking. My spouse stared at me. I gazed at my kid. "What did you say, my love?" I asked softly, trying not to shake. My brother touched my private parts twice. I coughed on my own breath. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then my hubby got up. His chair tipped backward. I followed him as if my legs were moving themselves. I called Adrian. He didn't respond. I called again. This time he picked up. "What's wrong, Mom? Come home now." "What happened?" "Just come home." He got off the line. It took him 20 minutes to arrive. He stepped in with his knapsack on his shoulder, perplexed. "What happened?" Before he could respond, my husband pushed him hard against the wall. "Did you touch her? Did you touch your sister?" "What? What are you talking about?" Adrian couldn't grasp. I swear it. I could see it on his face. He was pale, terrified, stammering and shaking his head. "No, of course not. I would never do that. I don't know why she's saying that." But my husband wouldn't let him go on. He punched him in the face. Adrian collapsed to the floor, bleeding from his nose, and looked up at us with a mixture of terror, amazement, and something more. Something I'd never seen before in him. Betrayal. I did nothing. I simply gazed at him. I did not hug him. I did not defend him. I did not believe him. My husband went to his room and got his backpack, clothes, and paperwork. He went outside, flung everything on the doorstep and screamed, "You're dead to us, never come back." Adrian was crying, practically begging. He said he didn't comprehend and it wasn't true. "Please don't kick me out." And I simply stood there clutching Isabella. No word, not a single one. We excluded him from everything. We changed the locks and canceled his college support. He never returned to that house or made another call. He ceased to exist for us. We spent weeks convincing ourselves that we had done the right thing by sheltering our baby. We questioned her multiple times if there was anything more that had happened. She only said no twice. And we never took her to a psychologist because we thought our love was enough and we blindly believed her. For a while, it appeared that peace was returning. Isabella played, smiled, and slept better. I started sleeping too, until the dreams started. I would see Adrian on the floor, his face bleeding, his eyes wide, gazing at me, his mother, and asking, "Why?" Because I didn't inquire, I didn't doubt, I simply acted. That was the night I completely destroyed him. Months have passed since we kicked Adrian out. Months of silence, denial, and thinking we'd done the right thing. Isabella smiled again, playing. She even mentioned that she felt safer today. I viewed that as a sign that we had acted appropriately. My husband never brought up Adrian's name again. Whether I indicated that I missed him or inquired whether we knew anything about him, his expression would freeze me from the inside. Adrian didn't exist for him anymore. Until that Saturday, Isabella was on her way to art class. An elder cousin was driving her. It was a calm afternoon. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. I don't recall much of the call. Only a few words remain in my ear. Accident, head-on collision, ambulance, one person killed. The girl is in critical condition. My husband followed me as I hurried to the hospital. We arrived as she was being brought to the ER. There was blood, there were shrieks. Doctors were scurrying everywhere. I saw her pale, unconscious little face covered in tubes. For a little moment, the world fell silent again. My niece was killed in the impact. Isabella lived, but only barely. The diagnosis was straightforward: serious damage to her left kidney, several internal hemorrhages, and contusions. She would require immediate surgery, most likely a transplant. The physicians advised us that time was of the essence and that we should be prepared for the worst. We spent days in the ICU. I never left her side, sleeping on a chair and refusing to eat. I simply stared at the machines that kept her alive. My husband became a statue. He didn't speak or cry. He was simply there. One night Isabella opened her eyes. She was weak. She couldn't speak clearly, but she recognized me. She gave me a small grin and asked, "Mom, do you think there is a heaven?" My throat tightened. "Yes, my love, of course there is." "And do you think bad people can go there if they're sorry?" "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" She took a break. Her gaze grew far away. "Because I did something very bad. Something exceedingly awful." I felt my stomach drop. "A few months ago I lied to you. I lied about Adrian." I didn't speak. "What? What did you lie about?" "I made it up, Mom. The part about him touching me. It wasn't true. I was just angry because he wouldn't let me use his tablet. I wanted to punish him. I thought if I said something I don't know. I didn't think all of that would happen. Then I became afraid and didn't know how to convey the truth." Her eyes flooded with tears. Mine had already overflowed. "I killed my brother," she replied, sobbing. "And now I'm going to die too." I clutched her, as if I might draw her soul into mine. "Don't say that. You're not going to die. Forgive you. I'm right here with you." But inside, a fracture was tearing me apart. Not for her, but for him. Adrian. For his expression on the floor and his quiet. That night I returned home. I dragged myself like a dying beast. I told my hubby everything. He was calm. He didn't say anything for several minutes. Finally, without looking at me, he murmured, "We're not going to judge her. What's done is done," and walked away. His apathy hurt me more than his fist that night, but I couldn't take the stillness any longer. In the early hours of the morning, I looked for Adrian. His phone number was disconnected. I found him after searching social media platforms. A profile image without a face indicates a semi-abandoned account. I emailed him, "Hi, it's me. Please just read this." He did not respond. I waited 1 day. 2. On the 3rd day, I sent an additional message. Long and painful. I informed him about the accident, Isabella, and the confession. I told him I wasn't expecting him to forgive me. I just wanted him to know Mom wanted to see him, that she didn't have much time, and that we weren't asking for anything else. Hours later, a response. "You all hurt me too much. I don't know if I can forgive, but if she's as bad as you say, I'll go one last time." My hands trembled as I texted him the hospital location. I heard nothing else for 3 days. I was in the hallway when I noticed him. Adrian is leaner, has dark circles under his eyes, and wears basic clothing. He walked as if he were carrying the weight of the world upon his shoulders. My heart desired to run to him. My body did not move. I watched him enter the room. She spotted him. He stared at her, and time stood still. Isabella burst out in tears. "I'm sorry. Please, I ruined you." Adrian listened quietly. "I can't forgive you completely," he finally replied, "but a part of me already has." He grasped her hand, spoke to her for a few minutes, and then went. He did not greet or glance at me. He only left one sentence before going away. "If there's a funeral, I'll be there. But don't expect anything else." He didn't say anything else after that. Do not anticipate anything else. Adrian vanished again. No message, no reaction, only the echo of his voice in that room, in Isabella's cries, repeating her apology again and over, as if asking for forgiveness was sufficient. But I couldn't sleep now that I knew. I knew time was running out, and the only person who could save my daughter was the same one I had assisted in destroying. A week after his visit, the doctor confirmed it. "She's going to need a transplant soon." My spouse and I had compatibility tests. We weren't compatible, neither of us. The risk of rejection was exceedingly high. The doctor was direct. "A biological brother is the best option. If he's a match, the chances are much higher." I'd already known. I'd seen it in the medical records. They have the same blood type. O positive. Even though I knew I had no right, I looked for him again. I wrote to him from a number he didn't recognize. I just said, "It's important. Please, we need to talk." To my amazement, he consented. We met in a small remote coffee shop. He was on time. He strolled in alone without looking at anyone. He was wearing the same modest clothes and carrying a rucksack on his shoulder. However, his eyes were different. They were no longer the eyes of a hurt youngster, but of someone who had learnt to accept the emptiness. He sat across from us. My hubby was beside me. Nobody talked for several seconds. He interrupted the stillness. "What do you want?" I gulped hard. My voice quivered. "Adrian, we checked the test. There's a high chance you're a match for Isabella. The doctor says if you get tested, you could save her." He wasn't responding. He expressed no rage or astonishment, only fatigue. "You're asking me to donate to my sister?" "Yes, I told you." My husband intervened. "We know this doesn't erase the past, but it could be the first step to fixing things. To becoming a family again?" Adrian raised his eyebrows. He then gazed at us with surgical coldness. "Becoming a family again?" I asked, choking back tears. "We're not asking you to forgive us, just to help her. She's dying." Then he smiled. However, it was not a cheerful smile. It was a sad, sardonic, and perplexing smirk. "And you think this fixes everything?" my spouse asked, winking. "It's not for us. It's for her." Her? The same one who said I touched her? The one who watched me sleep on the street and didn't lift a finger? The one who only said she was sorry when she realized she might die? I tried to interrupt. "Adrian, please. Do you know how many times I thought about dying?" he asked. "How many nights I slept clutching my backpack? How many times I didn't eat for 2 days because I didn't have a single coin?" He looked at us but didn't notice us. He was speaking to his recollections. "I was about to throw myself off a bridge, not once but 3 times. And you know why I didn't? Because I told myself, if I survive this, then I'm going to live my way without owing anything to anyone." He took his place. "And now you come to ask me to cut myself in two, to give a part of myself to save you." My husband stood up as well, this time with his fists tightened. "Your sister is dying." "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Adrian asked, his expression mixed with wrath and pity. "You know what it means to me? That now it turns out I'm worth something. That now you need me. That now you want to listen to me." I was shaking with joy. "Just think about it, please. If not for her, then for yourself. So you can get closure on this." He was grumbling. "I've already got closure. I received it the night I slept on the street with a bloodied face while you celebrated Christmas without me." He then left. He did not shout, cry, or disrespect us. He just departed. That was the last time I saw him. I did not sleep that night. My husband paced the living room like a caged lion, muttering words like, ungrateful, selfish. What kind of brother does that? I heard him, but I didn't disagree because one phrase kept replaying in my head. She is dying, and he can save her. I felt useless, empty, and increasingly desperate. So I did the unthinkable. I opened Facebook. I shared a photo of Isabella in the hospital. Tubes, dark circles, her little face sleepy, delicate on the verge of death. I wrote a lengthy, honest, yet twisted text. I informed them that we needed a donor, that her brother was a match, that we had already apologized, that the girl had sought forgiveness, and that he was the only thing missing. I tagged him, using his full name, and concluded with a condemnatory sentence. What kind of monster refuses to save his sister when he has the power to do so? First there was silence. Then the post blew up. Dozens of reactions, hundreds of comments, initially from acquaintances, then relatives, and finally from complete strangers. Everyone held an opinion. Everyone pointed fingers. Everyone judged. Seriously, he's going to let a little girl die? A kidney, it's one kidney. You can live with one. After everything she suffered, it's the least he could do. What kind of human trash? A life for a life. It makes up for the damage. Some people went even further. A monster disguised as a victim. Anyone with a heart would donate without thinking. Maybe he did what the girl said, and that's why he doesn't want to help. That one hurt more than I expected because, despite knowing Adrian was innocent, I had made him the target again. I had unleashed a digital mob, but in my mind, I kept thinking the same thing. If he feels forced, he might say yes. Several hours passed. I reloaded the post every 5 minutes, waited, and checked his profile. Nothing. Until about 4 hours later he responded. Instead of a remark or a private message, send a video. He shared a roughly 5-minute video on his profile, and it received hundreds of reactions in less than an hour. It began with him sitting on a bench, an empty park in the background, plain clothes, untidy hair, and deep dark circles, yet with an expression I couldn't recognize. He started. "Hello, my name is Adrian. Many of you know me because of what my mother posted today. Some of you knew me before, others only from what you've read. I want to tell you something I never had the chance to say." He paused. Took a long breath. 2 years ago, my sister accused me of touching her in front of my entire family, and without asking me or listening to me, they beat me, threw me out, and took everything from me. I was 18 years old at the time, and my world collapsed. I slept on the street, went hungry, lost my scholarship, had no one to call, slept in libraries, hid in public restrooms to wash myself, and considered suicide several times. He then presented a recording from his phone. It was a talk with Isabella in the hospital. Her crying, confessing, pleading for his pardon, claiming she made it all up, that she had wrecked him, and that she did not deserve his forgiveness. Then he looked back at the camera. I saved this recording not for revenge, but because I knew that one day someone would try to turn me into the villain again. He took a break. His voice cracked. I do not wish for my sister to die, ever. But I will not save the people who killed me while I was still alive. I will not give them a piece of my body as a currency for their redemption. I am not their second chance. He ended with a heartbreaking sentence. I am not a monster, I just learned to say no, and this time, I am the one breaking the silence. He stopped the video, and I stood there stunned, my phone in my hand. The notifications began coming in. But now the comments were intended for us. What kind of mother allows that? You are the real monsters. She lies. You attack. And he's supposed to save you? Disgusting. I hope you live with that guilt for the rest of your lives. The private messages were terrible. My sister has blocked me. My folks called me and cried. My sister-in-law wrote to say she hoped the same thing happened to me. Isabella saw the video. She saw everything. I discovered her crying alone in her bed. Everyone hates me, she said. Everyone, even him. I didn't know how to respond. I just hugged her, but I'm not sure if it was out of love or remorse. The video has gone viral. In less than 24 hours, Adrian's post was shared on Facebook groups, Reddit, TikTok accounts that collected family confessions, and even Twitter threads arguing whether he should give the kidney. It wasn't only our narrative anymore, now everyone had an opinion. The majority supported him. Some argue that forgiveness does not force you to sacrifice yourself. Others replied, a kidney doesn't pay for a ruined life. And many simply said what I couldn't ignore, they deserve it. Isabella, who had before been just another victim in a hospital, was now viewed as a manipulator and liar. The phrase false accuser began emerging in the comments. One that cut me like a dagger was, let her die, just as she almost killed her brother. I had to erase the message. But it was too late. The damage had been done. But Adrian was not finished. A day after the first video, he posted another. This time, he wasn't speaking in the park, he was sitting at a table, holding a piece of paper in his hand. I've received a lot of questions, and the most common one is, why can't you just forgive? I'm going to try to explain it without anesthesia. His voice was calm, tired, and precise. I was accused of child abuse. There was no trial or proof, just a phrase shouted aloud, and that was enough. I lost my house, my schooling, and my name. I became a pariah, and no one wanted to be near me. Have you ever attempted to rent a room with the rumor that you abused someone? Have you ever tried to find work with a stain you can't erase, even if it's a lie? He held up a document. His medical records from a year ago show that he was treated for suicidal ideation, severe depression, and starvation. The first time I slept under a bridge, it was raining. The second night, I thought about swallowing all the pills I had. The third, someone spat on me in the street. He yelled, child abuser at me, and I had no one to call. He put the document on the table. I don't need you to understand me. I just need you to listen. I don't want revenge. I do not wish for my sister's death. But I will not offer myself up as a martyr for a family that buried me alive. He picked up a photograph. It was of him and Isabella when she was a small child. They were smiling. His hand was shaky. I loved her. She was my sister. I made her breakfast, changed her clothes, waited for her after school. And when she said what she said, she didn't just destroy my life. She destroyed me. He tore the photograph in half. He remained silent for a few seconds. My kidney is not a currency of redemption. I am not the cure for anyone's guilt. I will not donate, and I will not apologize for it. He ended the video with a line that felt like a bullet. If you look for me at the funeral, I'll be in the back. Not to comfort, but to watch what you built and left to die. He put the camera away. I vomited after seeing it. That is not a metaphor. I practically vomited in the hospital bathroom, from terror, remorse, and the fact that I could no longer hide. When I returned to the room, Isabella was awake. Her eyes were inflamed. She didn't say anything, only said, "Does he hate me?" I didn't know what to reply because I had no idea how he felt, only what I had done and what was coming. The doctors informed us that her condition was deteriorating, that the days were numbered, that there was no longer time to wait for regular donors, and that Adrian remained the most compatible candidate. But he had already mentioned that there would be no donations. That night, my spouse burst. "Damn selfish, ungrateful bastard. Let him rot wherever he is." I tried to calm him down, telling him that cursing would not help. "And what do you expect me to do? Applaud him for letting his sister die?" He isolated himself in the kitchen and smashed a dish. I sat alone. In solitude, I grieved as I glanced at images on my phone of them as children, when they were innocent. I cried like I never had before because I knew Isabella was going to die. And it wasn't due to a shortage of kidneys, it was for something far worse, a family's refusal to listen, believe, and love unreservedly. The room smelt like disinfectant and sadness. Isabella was unconscious and linked to more machinery than her body. Her skin was nearly translucent. Every time the alarm went off, I held my breath. The doctor would come in, check, change something and depart with the same expression. Containment, not solution, only waiting. The donation list was not moving, the compatibilities were minor. The chances are nearly negligible, and Adrian was gone. After his second video, he vanished entirely, deleting his social media accounts, changing his phone number, leaving no trace. Nobody knew where he was. And to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted him found. Not for his sake, but because I was concerned about what my husband would do if he ever saw him again. The days passed like sluggish blades. The hateful messages were no longer visible. They were now private. Some wrote to wish me strength. Others would tell me I deserved every moment of pain. A woman I didn't know sent me a message. "Proud of yourself now. You raised a daughter who lied and a son you destroyed." I hung up the phone. I did not switch it on again. One morning in the early hours, the doctor summoned us. The sentence was direct. "Prepare yourselves. She's no longer responding. It's just a matter of waiting for the moment." I walked out into the hallway. I slid from the wall to the floor. I did not cry. I just hugged my knees. My hubby didn't say anything. He was pale and shocked. He was not the same person who had beaten his son that night. He was a broken statue, waiting to be crushed totally. I returned to the room. I grasped Isabella's hand and whispered, "I'm here, my love. Mommy's here." There was no response. Just a continuous beep from the cardiac monitor. I closed my eyes and prayed for the first time. Not to a god, not for a miracle. I asked for time, just a little more, just a bit more. And day later, we got a letter with no return address. There is no name, only a sheet of paper folded in three. It came from Adrian. "Don't search for me, I'm not going to change my mind. I don't want her to die, but I won't take part in a forced redemption play. Isabella lied, and you believed her. I was sentenced without a trial, and all I wanted for was to be heard. Which no one granted. So don't ask me to give you my body now. You've already taken my soul. They believe death redeems, but I died 2 years ago. Her end is not my fault. It is an echo of her origin. I hope you find peace, but don't search for it in me." There was no signature. Only a photo of him smiling from years ago, when he still considered us family. Isabella died a week later. There were no screams or warnings, just a flat tone and a straight line across the screen. My husband collapsed. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just held her until they removed her out of my arms. The funeral was modest and frigid. The majority of the family had withdrawn themselves, some out of shame and others out of hatred. Nobody knew what to say to us. And Adrian, he did come. He arrived in quiet, sat in the rear, did not cry, look at us, or approach the casket. Finally he rose up, left a single flower, and walked away silently. Today, I'm writing from a silent house. My husband no longer speaks. He spends his days watching television with the volume turned off. I stroll through the empty rooms with my daughter's clothes still folded on her bed. Every now and then, I look back at her last photo, when she was still breathing and had a chance. And I think of Adrian, of his words, his broken stare, of what we did and did not do. And I remind myself, death does not come alone, it carries remorse and memories with it. And neither can be buried. One suggestion. I read your whole story. I sat in silence and could only think. What an insane mother. You literally killed him in life and then you expect him to save you. After you took everything from him, now you're asking for an organ. If I were him, I wouldn't have given it to you either. In fact, I'd be in the line of people spitting in your face. I hope his gaze haunts you until your last day. 2 further comments. You left him without a home, without food, without emotional support, without a future, and you wanted him to risk his health for you. How can you even ask why he didn't want to donate? The answer is obvious and painful, because you killed him first. A 3rd comment. Your story is the closest thing I've read to a slow-motion murder. Adrian died when you threw him out on the street like trash, and now you're crying because he wouldn't save the one who lied. Did it not occur to you that every time he saw his sister, he was reliving the trauma? The nerve? The ego? The total lack of humanity? A 4th comment follows. The way you minimize everything you did is terrifying. My husband hit him. It sounds like you're saying he spilled his coffee. Your son was physically assaulted, thrown out, abandoned, and vilified by everyone. And you recount it as if it were an uncomfortable anecdote. What kind of emotional psychopath are you? The 5th comment is, you know what the worst part of all this was? That your daughter confessed she lied and you still decided to use her tragedy to manipulate your son again. You learned nothing. You just changed tactics. First it was guilt, then fear, then public blackmail. You are the nightmare of any human being with a mother. The 6th comment. I refuse to feel sorry for you. You made your son's life impossible. Then you tried to paint him as a monster for not donating a damn kidney. You used him like a piece of meat, and when he said no, you tried to manipulate the entire internet. How shameful. What moral depravity. I hope you never find peace. The 7th comment. Adrian is a hero for still being alive after what you did to him. He was the one who deserved help. He was the one who needed urgent therapy. But you were too busy protecting your parental egos to see that you were destroying him. And even today, you continue to blame him. Monstrous. The 8th comment. What did you expect? That he would give you the kidney and then you'd all pose for a reconciled family photo? This isn't a fairy tale. This is real life. And in real life, the people you destroyed don't come back when it's convenient for you. They don't forgive you automatically. They don't save you just because you're bleeding crocodile tears. Comment 9 is as follows. You used his pain as a public weapon, you exposed him with his full name, you humiliated him after having already thrown him onto the street. And you wonder why he blocked you? The question should be, how did he not sue you? Because he had more than enough reason. It's a miracle you're not in jail. And it's a miracle he's sane. A 10th comment. Isabella didn't die from lack of a kidney. She died from a lie and from parents who didn't know how to handle it. The blame isn't Adrian's, it's yours. You killed her with silence, with denial, with manipulation. And now you want to lay the corpse at his feet? I don't buy it. I'm not swallowing that. Parents secretly used $15,500. On my credit card for my sister's Europe trip, I reported them, hired a lawyer, and turned their scheme upside down. I am Lucas, a 28-year-old man, and my younger sister Lily, a 22-year-old female, recently graduated from college. Our parents have always had an odd approach to parenting, but this newest act has made me enraged. To provide some context, I've always been the responsible member of the family. I worked hard in school, received scholarships, and found a nice career in finance right out of college. I've been financially independent since I was 22, and I'm pleased of my accomplishments. Lily, on the other hand, has always been the baby in the family. Don't get me wrong, I adore my sister, but she's clearly been coddled by our parents. Growing up, it was obvious that Lily was the favorite. She was given the latest clothes and gadgets and was never forced to work part-time or help with home duties. I tried not to let it affect me too much, focused instead on my own aspirations and future, but occasionally the partiality was difficult to ignore. I recall one specific instance when I was 16 and Lily was 10. I'd been saving for months to buy a new gaming console. When I finally had enough money, I joyfully informed my parents that I was going to the store to buy it. To my surprise, they answered, "Oh, we already bought one for Lily last week. You can share hers." I was upset, but I swallowed my disappointment and tried to be pleased for my sister. Let's fast forward to the present. Lily recently finished with a communications degree. I am truly proud of her. She worked hard and earned the right to celebrate her accomplishment. I also sent her a wonderful graduation gift. A new laptop she had been wanting. My mom called me last week. She was overjoyed, telling me how they had prepared the ideal graduation gift for Lily, a month-long vacation of Europe. I was overjoyed for Lily, believing it was a lovely gift from our parents, but then the bombshell dropped. We used your credit card to book it all, my mother explained nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We'll pay you back, of course, but we needed the points from your card to upgrade some of the flights and hotels. I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I heard. When I finally recovered my voice, I inquired about the amount they had spent. The response made me feel as if I had been punched in the gut. $15,500. $15,500 was charged to my credit card without my knowledge or consent. Mom, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. You can't just use my credit card without asking me. That's illegal, and $15,500 is a lot of money. She dismissed my concerns. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Lucas. It's for your sister's graduation. We're family, and family helps each other out. Besides, we're good for it. We'll pay you back eventually. Eventually? What exactly did that mean? And since when has $15,500 been considered casual? I tried to explain to my mother why this was such a significant deal. The effect on my credit score, the possibility that I may need the credit limit for an emergency, and the sheer breach of trust. But she didn't hear it. You've always been so selfish, she replied, her voice becoming cold. Can't you just be happy for your sister? This is her big moment, and you're trying to ruin it with your penny-pinching ways. I couldn't believe what I heard. I was considered selfish for being concerned about a $15,500 unauthorized charge on my credit card. I hung off the phone feeling angry, wounded, and incredulous. Over the next few days I tried to talk to my father, hoping he'd be more reasonable, but he agreed with my mother, telling me I was overreacting and that I should be more supportive of my sister. Lily, for her part, appeared clueless to the entire event. When I tried to talk to her about it, she just gushed about how happy she was for the trip and thanked me for helping with her graduation gift. I felt crazy. Was I truly the unreasonable one here? I decided to phone the credit card company to dispute the charges, but to my astonishment, I learned that my parents had used my card information, which they kept in case of an emergency, to book everything online. The credit card company stated that because I had provided them my information, it was not deemed fraud. Now I'm faced with a $15,500 bill, a maxed-out credit card, and a family who thinks I'm greedy for refusing to pay my sister's lavish vacation. I am hurt, furious, and feel betrayed by those who are supposed to love and support me. I do not know what to do. Part of me wants to cancel the entire vacation, but I know it would cause a major schism in our family. Another part of me wants to just pay it off to avoid the fuss, but $15,500 is a large sum of money, and the principle of the situation bothers me. Plus, I'm concerned that if I let this go, it may set a precedent for future financial exploitation. Am I overreacting? Should I just suck it up and pay for my sister's vacation, or should I remain firm, even if it means risking my connection with my family? I'm feeling lost and could use some advice. Update 1. I appreciate everyone's encouraging remarks and advice. I was stunned by the huge response to my post. Reading through your comments helped me realize that I wasn't insane for feeling violated and outraged over this scenario. I took your counsel and decided to take action. First, I called my credit card company again to escalate the situation. I described the scenario in detail, emphasizing that, while my parents had my card information for emergencies, I had never allowed this exact use. After some back and forth, they decided to look into the charges as possible fraud. Next, I sent a group text to my parents and Lily, requesting a Zoom call to discuss the problem. I wanted to give them the opportunity to set things right before taking more serious actions. The call was intense. I began by calmly describing why their actions were unacceptable. The legal consequences, the violation of trust, and the financial strain it placed on me. I informed them that I had reported the transactions as fraudulent and that they needed to cancel the trip immediately. My parents' reaction did not meet my expectations. They were furious, accusing me of being dramatic and attempting to derail Lily's graduation party. My mom went so far as to say, "We raised you, clothed you, and put a roof over your head. The least you could do is help give your sister the trip of a lifetime." I took a deep breath before responding. You chose to have children. Providing for us was your responsibility as parents. It doesn't mean you get to commit credit card fraud in my name. And Lily, who had remained calm until now, burst into sobs. "I can't believe you're trying to ruin my graduation gift," she said. "You've always been jealous of me. Why can't you be happy for me for once?" Her comments hurt, but they also bolstered my determination. I saw that this pattern of entitlement and favoritism was pervasive, and it was necessary to establish some clear boundaries. "Lily," I began, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "I'm happy for you. I'm proud of your graduation. But this trip was booked illegally using my money without my permission. It's not a gift from me, and it's not okay. My father, who had been unusually silent, eventually spoke up. Son, we didn't think it was such a big deal. We've always had access to your card for emergencies. We just thought, as family, it would be okay this one time. I couldn't believe what I heard. Dad, $15,500 is not a small amount, and this was not an emergency. You can't just decide to spend my money without asking me. The call concluded with my parents outraged, Lily in tears, and me exhausted yet determined. They declined to cancel the trip, claiming that I was overreacting and that they would reimburse me. Soon after the call, I took the next move. I contacted a lawyer buddy of mine and discussed the circumstances. He informed me that what my parents did was illegal, and that if I chose to take legal action, I would have valid reasons. I also went to the police station and reported the unauthorized usage of my credit card. The officer I dealt with was compassionate and took down all the information. He advised me that pressing charges would most certainly cause a significant schism in my family, but he also informed me that I was perfectly within my rights to do so. I'm still torn about what to do next. On the one hand, I adore my family, and the thought of pursuing legal action against them makes me sick. On the other hand, their behavior is inappropriate, and I'm concerned that if I don't take a firm stance now, this will happen again in the future. For the time being, I've opted to await the results of the credit card company's investigation. I have also frozen my credit to prevent further fraudulent usage of my information. This entire experience has made me understand that I need to set tighter boundaries with my family. I've always tried to be the peacekeeper, to smooth things over and make everyone happy, but in doing so, I've let myself be taken advantage of numerous times. I am hurt and outraged, but I also feel a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time, I'm standing up for myself and saying, no. This is not okay. It's unsettling and frightening, but it also feels important. Thank you all again for your encouragement and wisdom. I'll update again if I receive more information about the credit card investigation, or if anything else happens with my family. Update 2. It's been several weeks since my last update, and a lot has happened. I'd like to thank everyone again for their help and advice. Your remarks have given me strength at this tough time. First, good news. The credit card company's probe ended in my favor. They agreed that the accusations were improper and reversed them. It's a big relief to have the $15,500 burden removed off my shoulders. Now for the familial fallout. When my parents and Lily discovered that the vacation had been canceled owing to a credit card chargeback, all hell broke loose. My phone was full of angry calls and texts. My mother left a particularly harsh voicemail, calling me a greedy, ungrateful son who had ruined Lily's life. Lily resorted to social media, sharing an emotional video describing how her spiteful brother had ruined her ideal graduation trip. Some of our shared acquaintances and extended family members began to contact me, asking why I was treating my younger sister so badly. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I realized I needed to correct the record. I made a calm, factual post detailing what had actually happened, how my card had been used without my consent, and how I had attempted to handle the situation with my family before contacting the credit card company. The response to my post was varied. Some others were supportive, expressing surprise at my parents' behavior. Others still believed I should have just taken one for the team and let Lily have her trip. It was surprising to learn how many people believed it was acceptable to conduct fraud as long as it was for family. A few days after my post, I got a surprise call from my aunt, my mother's sister. She was empathetic to my predicament and told me about some family history that I didn't know. Apparently, my mother had a history of financial carelessness and had previously taken advantage of family members. My aunt encouraged me to hold firm and offered her support. This chat with my aunt made me realize that the problem was deeper than simply this one episode. It was a pattern of behavior that had been tolerated and justified for years. I understood then that I needed to set clear boundaries, not just for myself, but also to halt the pattern of financial abuse. I decided to take a major step. I informed my parents that I would be in no communication with them for the foreseeable future. I mentioned that I needed time to comprehend what had transpired and could not trust them just now. I also informed Lily that, while I loved her and was pleased of her accomplishments, I wanted some space from her as well. Their reactions were unsurprisingly negative. My parents accused me of pulling the family apart. Lily screamed, accusing me of punishing her for something she didn't do. It was difficult, but I stood by my decision. In the midst of all this familial dysfunction, I've been working on safeguarding myself against future financial exploitation. I changed all of my passwords, closed the credit card that my parents had access to, and opened a new one with a different bank. I've also started seeing a therapist to work through my emotions about the situation and establish healthier limits. One unexpected positive result of this journey has been a closer relationship with my aunt and a couple of cousins who have reached out to provide assistance. It's comforting to know that not everyone in my family feels what my parents did was acceptable. Regarding Lily's graduation vacation, I heard through the family grapevine that my parents are still considering about sending her somewhere. Part of me feels sorry for her losing out on the Europe trip, but I keep reminding myself that it was not my obligation to provide it for her. I am still dealing with thoughts of guilt and mistrust. There are times when I question if I did the right thing, or if I was too harsh. But then I recall how violated I felt when I learned what they had done, and I know I made the correct decision by sticking up for myself. This incident was a tough wake-up call, but it also taught me valuable lessons about self-respect and setting limits. I'm learning that it's all right to say no, even to family, and that love should not have a price. Thank you again for your support. I'll keep you updated if there are any important developments, but for the time being, I'm focusing on healing and moving forward. Post 3. It's been approximately 2 months since my last post, and I'd want to share some developments with you all. Your ongoing support and advice have been vital during this difficult time. First, I'll address the most important issue, the legal status. After careful study and consulting with my lawyer, I decided not to file charges against my parents. This was not an easy decision, and I know many of you advised me to pursue legal action. However, my lawyer said that because the credit card company had reversed the charges, prosecuting a criminal case would be hard and potentially costly, with no assurance of success. Instead, we wrote my parents a formal cease and desist letter, informing them that any future attempts to use my financial information would result in instant legal action. Now for the family situation. My no-contact period with my parents and Lily has been both difficult and educational. It's given me time to ponder on our family relationships and improve myself. I've been going to therapy on a regular basis, which has been quite beneficial in helping me process my feelings and set healthier limits. About a month into the no-contact period, I got an unexpected email from Lily. Compared to her prior crying claims, this email was rather sophisticated. She wrote that she had thought a lot about our parents' actions and realized how wrong they were. She apologized for her first reaction and for not advocating for me. Lily said that she had always known about the favoritism but had been too afraid and comfortable to question it. I was cautiously optimistic about Lily's email but decided to take it slowly. We've had a few phone talks since then, and I can tell she truly wants to understand my point of view. She revealed some of her own experiences with our parents' financial irresponsibility, which she had previously kept to herself. The aborted trip to Europe appears to have served as a wake-up call for her as well. My parents have been less inclined to accept responsibility. They've made multiple attempts to reach me, including angry voicemails and guilt-tripping emails. My mother even showed up at my place unexpectedly one day, causing quite a ruckus in the hallway. I held firm and refused to engage, which was difficult but important. The situation with extended family members has been mixed. Some family have been helpful, particularly my aunt, who first contacted out. She has become an important ally and source of support. Others, however, continue to encourage me to reconcile with my parents, citing the "but their family" argument. I've had to distance myself from some of these family for my own mental health. On a good side, this predicament has resulted in some unanticipated personal development. With the time and energy I used to devote to dealing with my family's problems, I've been able to concentrate more on my own life and ambitions. I've started a new passion, photography, and I'm spending more time with pals that respect my boundaries. I've also made important financial decisions. I've upped my payments to retirement accounts and begun to construct a more substantial emergency fund. This entire experience has truly emphasized the significance of financial independence and stability. Last week, I had an especially satisfying moment. I was promoted at work, which came with a big wage increase. Previously, I might have felt forced to share this news and the financial rewards with my family. This time, I celebrated quietly with a few close friends, pleased of my successes but free of shame or obligation to share. Regarding Lily's graduation vacation, my aunt informed me that our parents decided to send her on a 2-week tour of California. Lily seemed to appreciate it. Looking ahead, I am cautiously optimistic. I've chosen to extend my no-contact period with my parents for at least 3 more months. I need more time to recuperate and to determine whether they are capable of respecting my boundaries. I'm willing to gradually re-establish our relationship with Lily, but I'm treading carefully and setting firm boundaries. This event taught me a lot about setting boundaries, advocating for myself, and understanding the actual meaning of family. I've understood that family is more than just blood links, it's about mutual respect, support, and love. The friends and relatives who have supported me during this ordeal have taught me what true family is like. I also learned an important lesson about financial freedom. I've always been good with money, but this situation has made me even more attentive. I've increased security measures on all of my accounts and grown more forceful about protecting my financial information, even from family members. There have been moments of doubt and sadness, particularly when I have missed family gatherings due to the no-contact policy. Mother's Day was very painful, but I remind myself that this separation is essential for my mental health and personal development. One unanticipated result of this scenario is that I've become a resource for friends who are coping with financial problems in their own families. Several people have contacted me for guidance on setting boundaries and dealing with financially irresponsible family members. It is great to be able to assist others in similar situations. My aunt informed me that my parents are experiencing financial difficulties. Apparently, they had planned to use my credit for more than simply Lily's vacation. This has resulted in some arguments between them, with my father blaming my mother for going too far with the credit card fraud. Part of me feels awful knowing they're struggling financially, but I remind myself that it's not my obligation to correct their poor financial decisions. Lily has provided some insight into our parents' reactions to all of this. She claims they're still not sure why I responded so strongly. They regard their acts as a natural part of being a family and don't understand why I'm making such a big deal about it. This lack of understanding is frustrating, but it also confirms that I made the proper decision to distance myself. I've been reflecting a lot about my upbringing and early adulthood, noticing patterns of financial and emotional exploitation that I had internalized. It's been both heartbreaking and liberating. I'm learning to validate my own emotions and experiences without needing permission from my parents. In my personal life, I've begun dating again. I was scared to become involved with anyone while dealing with so much family dysfunction, but I recently met someone who has been quite sympathetic of my position. It's early days, but it feels fantastic to be connecting with someone that respects my boundaries and principles. I'm also considering making some major life adjustments. I've always wanted to get a master's degree, but I put it off because I was concerned about how it would affect my capacity to support my family financially. Now I'm actively researching programs and contemplating taking the plunge. It is empowered to make decisions based simply on what is best for me and my future. As I write this report, I am impressed by how much has changed in only a few months. The initial shock and indignation have subsided, replaced by a sense of quiet determination. I am no longer simply responding to my family's activities, I'm actively building the life I desire for myself. To those of you who are coping with similar family troubles, I want to express that it will get better. Setting boundaries is difficult, and there may be reaction. But stay strong. You have the right to safeguard yourself, your wealth, and your mental health. Thank you all for your continued support throughout this adventure. Your counsel and encouragement have been lifelines. I am not sure what the future holds for my relationship with my parents and sister, but I am confident that whatever happens, I will be fine. I'm stronger, more confident in myself, and prepared to face whatever comes next. I will provide an update if there are any important developments, but for the time being, I am focused on moving forward and creating the life I want, surrounded by people who respect and support me. Here's to new beginnings and hard-gained wisdom. Update 4. It's been 6 months since my previous update, and I felt it was time to share the most recent developments with everyone who has been so supportive along this trip. First, the major news. I've been accepted to a master's program at a city around 3 hours from where I now live. It's a 2-year financial technology curriculum that precisely coincides with my professional ambitions. I start this fall, and I'm both eager and scared about this new chapter in my life. The decision to seek this degree was not simple. It entails leaving my work, relocating to a new city, and taking out some student debts. However, it also entails investing in myself and my future in ways I've always wanted to. I realized I had been holding myself back by constantly considering how my decisions would affect my family. Now I'm making decisions based on what's best for me, which feels extremely liberated. My family situation has taken unexpected turns. My no-contact period with my parents officially ended 2 months ago. I consented to participate in a family therapy session led by a professional therapist. It was intense. My parents responded defensively, arguing that they had done nothing wrong. However, as the discussion went, several shocking truths emerged. It turned out that my father had lost a considerable amount of money in a disastrous venture, which he had kept from everyone, including my mother. They'd been discreetly struggling financially for months and saw my credit card as a method to keep up appearances. This discovery caused a lot of tears and recriminations. My mother felt betrayed by my father's secrecy. My father felt ashamed of his terrible financial judgments. And both of them seemed to realize the significance of what they had done to me. While this explanation does not justify their actions, it does help me understand the desperation that drove their awful decisions. The therapist assisted us in working through some of these difficulties, and for the first time, I received genuine apologies from both of my parents. We agreed to continue family therapy sessions on a monthly basis. It's a lengthy process, and I'm still setting tough boundaries, but I'm cautiously optimistic about repairing our connection on better terms. Lily has continued to develop and mature. She has taken steps to achieve financial independence, such as taking a full-time job and moving into her own apartment. We've started communicating more frequently, and I feel like I'm getting to know my sister as an adult for the first time. She's even asked for budgeting and saving tips, which feels like a big step forward in our relationship. On a personal level, the relationship I highlighted in my previous report has developed into something wonderful. Ingrid has been really supportive of my desire to return to school, despite the fact that it will need us to travel large distances for some time. Her personal experiences with creating boundaries with family have made her an invaluable source of support and understanding. Financially, I'm doing well. The promotion I obtained enabled me to save a large amount of money for my transfer and to help offset some of the expenditures of graduate studies. I've also gotten much more forceful in protecting my financial information. I recently had to turn down an attempt by a distant relative to persuade me to co-sign a loan. It was not easy, but I held firm, and it felt good to establish my boundaries. As I prepare for this new chapter in my life, I've been thinking about how much has changed since that first shocking phone call from my mother about the credit card charges. The pain and rage I felt back then have mostly vanished, giving way to a sense of empowerment and self-assurance I had no idea I had. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned the value of establishing and keeping boundaries, especially with family. I've realized that it's acceptable to prioritize my own well-being and future, and I've learned that true family, whether blood or choice, encourages growth and respects personal limits. Thank you to everyone who has followed my story and contributed support and advice along the way. During some of the most trying times, your words have provided me with strength and insight. Those going through comparable family issues should know that they can come out stronger and wiser. As I pack my flat and prepare for this new journey, I experience a surge of excitement and possibilities that I haven't felt in years. I am proud of how far I have come, and I am excited about what the future holds. I may not be able to update for a long due to my upcoming move and start of school, but I will always be grateful for the support I've received here. My brother tackled my groom before the vows. I screamed at him, then realized he'd tried to save my damn life. As I came down the aisle, my brother dashed past me with a gas can, doused the entire altar in gasoline, and set it on fire before tackling my groom directly into the burning flowers. My veil caught fire as guests stampeded toward the exit, shouting, while my brother pinned my fiancé down amid the flames, hitting him and yelling something I couldn't understand over the noise. The groomsmen carried my brother away, while my fiancé rolled on the ground, second-degree burns covering his hands and arms. My mother sobbed so hard that she vomited on her dress. My father was yelling at my brother for destroying our family, and 300 guests screamed and dialed 911. My brother continued to resist the 4 men who were holding him down, blood gushing from the nose where the best man had struck him, still shouting that my fiancé was attempting to kill me. Everyone was soothing my burned and bleeding fiancé, who was crying, while older guests need medical attention because of the panic, and the flower girl was devastated beyond words. The priest was praying over the broken altar while a bridesmaid wailed over how my brother had ruined the most important day of my life, when security arrived to arrest him. "Check the champagne he was about to give her for the toast," my brother yelled as cops handcuffed him, his voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "He's been poisoning her with mercury for months, and today's dose would have killed her before you cut the cake." Everyone became silent, except for the fire that remained blazing through what used to be our ceremonial space. And my brother continued to speak quickly since he knew he just had a few seconds before being hauled away. "Look at her hands shaking, her hair falling out in chunks. The confusion she thinks is wedding stress, but it's actually mercury poisoning from the makeup he's been switching out since March when they moved in together." My quivering hands moved to my thinning hair, which I had been finding on my pillow every morning. And my brother kept going, exhibiting texts from his phone that the officers hadn't yet collected. I have screenshots of him asking his pharmacist friend about lethal doses and how to make it look like sudden illness, plus receipts for mercury compounds he bought online using cryptocurrency so it couldn't be traced. My fiancé attempted to stand, but the best man stopped him, though I noted the grip had shifted from supporting to restraining as uncertainty crept across his face. He took out a $3 million life insurance policy on her last month without telling her, and their honeymoon suite already has a syringe of concentrated mercury hidden in his luggage that would have caused complete organ failure within hours of injection. My aunt, a nurse, approached the champagne table and dipped her finger in my glass, then jerked back, saying it smelled off, like metal and chemicals mingled with the champagne. More guests began checking their phones, looking up mercury poisoning symptoms, and staring at me as they recognized the symptoms I'd been exhibiting for months, which we'd all attributed to wedding planning stress. My brother was able to pull up further proof on his phone, displaying bank statements indicating that my fiancée had been depleting my savings account in small increments that I hadn't seen since I was too bewildered to check, preparing himself financially for after my death. But that's not even the worst part, my brother exclaimed as two officers grabbed his arms and his voice broke with despair. My fiancée had already given me a partial dose this morning in my breakfast smoothie, knowing it would take effect during the reception to make my death look more natural, and the antidote window was closing fast because mercury binds to your organs within hours. My brother had broken into my fiancé's apartment last night and discovered his journal documenting every dose he'd given me for 6 months, with notes about my increasing symptoms and calculations for how much more He'd gone to the police at 2 a.m., but the chief, my fiancé's uncle, stated there wasn't enough evidence for an arrest, and then called my fiancé right away to warn him that my brother was causing trouble, which is why my fiancé bumped up the timing. That's when my brother understood that the only way to save me was to cancel the wedding before I drank the last dose. And lighting the altar on fire was the only way to ensure that the wedding could not proceed because my fiancé had duped me into believing my brother was envious and unstable. The crowd turned to look at my fiancé, whose expression had changed from victim to cold and calculating as he realized his scheme had been exposed to 300 witnesses. 2 groomsmen grabbed his arms, but he was already going faster than anyone anticipated of someone with burns, adrenaline overcoming his anguish. The cake table was just behind him, so he grabbed the ornamental knife we were going to use for cutting and spun toward me before anyone could react or stop him. His scorched palm gripped my neck, despite the anguish it must have given him, and the blade pressed against my throat as he drew me back against his chest, using me as a shield. The police officers who had been arresting my brother paused, hands on their firearms. But my fiancé was using me as a fantastic human shield, so they couldn't get a good shot. "Everyone, stay exactly where you are," he urged, his voice chilly and methodical, as if he were reading from a pharmacology textbook. "Or I'll finish what I started right here in front of everyone." The blade cut deeper as he dragged me backward toward the kitchen doors, leaving 300 people transfixed in amazement. My brother battled the 2 cops who were holding him and yelled for my fiancé to let me go. His expression contorted with desperation as he saw the man he'd tried to stop use me as a shield. The best man, who had been holding my fiancé back, dropped his arms entirely and stepped away with his hands up, suddenly realizing he'd been defending someone who had been poisoning me for several months. Even with the knife digging into my skin, I pushed myself to speak, telling my fiancé that everyone knew the truth, and that hurting me would make no difference. He drew me closer to his scorched chest and remarked that if he was going down anyhow, he may as well finish what he started because the mercury was now in my system. The priest stepped forward with both hands raised, as if confronting a ferocious animal, and begged my fiancé to consider his soul and what this meant for eternity. My fiancé chuckled at that bitter sound, which was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him before, and stated God stopped listening to him years ago when the debt began to pile up and I became his only way out. A massive crack split the air as a portion of the blazing altar collapsed, sending sparks flying over the church floor, making everyone flinch, including my fiancé. I pushed my elbow back into his scorched ribs as hard as I could, and his grip relaxed just enough for me to drop my whole weight while turning away from the blade. As I dropped, the knife grabbed my shoulder, slicing through my dress and into my skin, but I kept moving, landing hard on the marble floor while my fiancé lunged for me. Before he could reach me, 3 officers rushed him, sending the knife flying across the floor as they pinned him down, his scorched hands leaving bloody prints on the white marble as he battled them. EMTs hurried up to me as cops handcuffed my fiancé, who screamed that I deserved it because I was too ignorant to see what he was doing for 6 months. My brother broke free from the officers who were holding him and went on his knees beside me, again apologizing for not finding another way to save me. Tears mixed with the blood that still flowed from his nose. The EMTs put bandages against my shoulder wound while stating that I needed to be sent to the hospital straight away for something called chelation therapy to treat the mercury poisoning. My mother sank into my father's arm, sobbing, and I overheard him tell my brother that he had saved my life. His voice breaking on the words. The EMTs pulled me onto a stretcher and rushed me out, past all of the wedding guests who were still stunned, past the flaming altar, which was now mostly smoking ruins, and past the champagne table, where my poisoned glass remained. In the ambulance, an EMT with the name Blake began an IV in my arm, while stressing that mercury poisoning required quick treatment to avoid permanent organ damage. My entire body was shivering, but not from fear. The poison was attacking my nervous system, causing my muscles to quiver and jerk uncontrollably. Blake started talking in a steady voice about how the therapy would help, but I could barely hear him because my eyesight was blurry and my head felt like it was full of cotton. The ambulance arrived at the emergency room and they pushed me right in, where a doctor, who turned out to be the same Blake from the ambulance, took over my case. He immediately ordered blood tests to confirm the mercury levels, and nurses connected me up to monitors that began beeping with my vital signs. Blake said that the two medicines would bind to the mercury, allowing my body to eliminate it, but we had found it just in time thanks to my brother's intervention. The blood draw made me dizzy, and I could see my hands shaking even more, these small tremors that I couldn't control no matter how hard I tried to keep them still. Blake explained that this was common for mercury poisoning and that the shaking will subside once the treatment began, but it could take weeks or even months to fully recover. It's interesting that my fiancé's uncle is the police chief who ignored the evidence at 2 a.m. That time seems incredibly convenient for someone plotting a murder at a wedding ceremony with lots of witnesses. Nurses continued coming in and out, checking my vitals and adjusting the IV, while Blake examined test findings on his iPad with a concerned expression that made my stomach plummet. He ultimately informed me that my mercury levels were alarmingly high, far exceeding what they would ordinarily see in industrial accidents, proving that my fiancé had been administering enormous quantities. The chelation treatment burned my veins and made me nauseous, but Blake said that indicated it was working, removing the mercury from my organs, where it had been piling up for months. My parents arrived with my aunt, who immediately began asking Blake about treatment methods and recovery times in medical language that I didn't understand. The door opened, and a lady in a dark suit entered, carrying a state police badge, and introduced herself as Detective Kara Holt, who was taking over the case due to a conflict of interest with the local police chief. She took out a notebook and began writing down what Blake told her about my mercury levels, while my mother continued caressing my arm as if she wanted to ensure I was still present. My aunt was asking Blake about something called chelation cycles and how long it would take for the shaking to stop, using medical terminology that made my head hurt much more than it already did. Detective Holt stated that with 300 wedding guests as witnesses and all of the physical evidence my brother discovered, my fiancé would not get away with what he did to me. She left to collect evidence, but returned 20 minutes later with plastic bags containing the champagne glass from the wedding and a sample of the smoothie my fiancé had prepared me that morning. The field tests revealed extremely high amounts of mercury in both, enough to kill me if I drank it all, so she sealed everything up for the crime lab. My brother arrived with 2 officers holding his arms, burns on his flesh from the altar fire, and swollen eyes where the best man had hit him. Detective Holt instructed the officers to remove the handcuffs because my brother's actions were clearly protective and had saved my life. So they were releasing him on his own recognizance. He just stood there staring at me with a relieved expression on his face while the nurses drew more blood from my arm for further testing. The results revealed that my mercury levels were significantly higher than expected, nearly fatal. But Blake claimed the interrupted dose indicated that my organs hadn't entirely failed yet. He started me on aggressive chelation therapy, stressing that I'd need repeated rounds for the following 3 months with careful monitoring to ensure the mercury was out of my system. The police chief stormed through the door, demanding to see his nephew. But Detective Holt stood directly in front of him and informed him that he was suspended pending an investigation for obstruction of justice. He began ranting about litigation and how she lacked authority, but she presented documents proving that state police had taken over jurisdiction due to his involvement in covering up an attempted murder. He stormed out, slamming the doors while Detective Holt called for someone to follow him to ensure he did not interfere with the inquiry. A lady called Rachel Monroe from the district attorney's office arrived next, putting up a chair beside my bed to take my statement on everything that had happened over the previous 6 months. She was writing quickly as I described the symptoms I'd been experiencing, the confusion and shaking I assumed were due to wedding stress, and how my fiancé had been so supportive when I was sick. Rachel stated that she was moving forward with charges for attempted murder in the first degree, as well as poisoning and fraud, and that she was certain of obtaining a conviction based on the evidence and witnesses. The wedding photographer then knocked on the door, carrying a bag full of memory cards and stating that he had documented everything on video, from my brother's attack to my fiancé holding the knife to my throat. Detective Holt confiscated the memory cards as evidence, claiming that the footage would be critical in showing the jury exactly what happened and establishing that my brother was trying to save me, not harm anyone. A man in a suit arrived, introduced himself as Victor Shaw, and stated that he was representing my brother and needed to discuss defense strategy for the fire and assault accusations. My brother informed him he didn't want any defense that said he was insane or didn't know what he was doing, since he knew precisely what he was doing and would do it again to save me. Given the imminent threat to my life, Victor continued to push the temporary insanity or necessity defense. But my brother shook his head and said he'd sooner go to jail than apologize for stopping a murder. Blake returned with more test results, this time from hair samples gathered, and his expression was dismal as he showed us the charts. The mercury levels in my hair dated back 6 months, beginning small and then increasing, demonstrating that my fiancé had been systematically poisoning me, as my brother had claimed. The timetable corresponded exactly with the notebook my brother discovered, demonstrating how my fiancé gradually increased the doses to avoid rapid death, which would appear suspicious. Each sample revealed increased quantities, along with notes on which portions of hair belonged to which months, resulting in a perfect record of attempted murder. Blake stated this type of evidence was uncommon because most poisoning victims do not live long enough for testing, but my brother's intervention saved not just my life, but also the proof. My hands shook even more as I realized that the man I was about to marry had been slowly killing me for half a year, calculating doses and watching me get sicker while appearing to care. Detective Holt photographed all of the test findings and stated, "This evidence, combined with the journal, would make it impossible for my fiancé to claim innocence or accident. She was putting together a case that would land him in prison for decades, if not life, and she guaranteed me he'd never be able to harm me or anybody else again." The next morning, Detective Holt called to say they had arrested the pharmacist friend at his workplace, bringing him out in handcuffs as his co-workers looked on in disbelief. She informed me he tried to flee when he saw the authorities approaching, but they apprehended him in the parking lot, and he was now in jail, with a lawyer urging him not to say anything. The cops had tracked down all of the cryptocurrency transactions my brother discovered, as well as hundreds of text exchanges between him and my fiancé discussing specific doses and how to make it appear natural. 2 days later, my fiancé was legally charged with attempted murder in the first degree, as well as poisoning, fraud and assault, with a deadly weapon for holding the knife to my throat. His lawyer attempted to secure bail, but the court looked at the evidence and concluded, no way. Not with him being a flight risk and the danger he posed to me. The courthouse was packed with media and wedding guests, and my fiancé sat there in his orange jumpsuit, charred hands still bandaged, glaring at me as if this was my fault. After 5 days in the hospital, they finally let me go home, but I had to return every day for additional chelation treatments, which made me feel ill and weak. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I kept discovering clumps of hair in the shower drain. But the doctor suggested the symptoms would improve with time and treatment. While I was packing up my hospital room, the insurance company called to inform me that the $3 million policy was void due to the fraud and attempted murder, and that insurance fraud had been added to the allegations against my fiancé. My brother was charged with arson and assault, but Rachel from the district attorney's office recommended reduced charges because he had saved my life. The judge consented to probation and community service instead of jail time, citing my brother's conduct as justified given the circumstances and the urgent threat to my life. That's when the media learned about everything, and our wedding fiasco became front-page news, with reporters camped outside my parents' house and calling everyone we knew for comment. We had to employ a publicist to manage all of the media inquiries and keep them from following me to my medical appointments. The church sent us a bill for $30,000 in fire damage, but they instantly withdrew it after our publicist described the complete story. The priest contacted to apologize for not noticing the indicators of abuse sooner and offered free therapy services if I needed them. 3 separate wedding attendees called Detective Holt, claiming they'd noticed my fiancé acting strangely with my beverages at parties and meals during the previous year. One bridesmaid burst into tears when she revealed she'd observed my symptoms months ago but dismissed them as wedding stress, and she now felt guilty for not speaking out sooner. Detective Holt uncovered my fiancé's laptop, on which he had hundreds of searches for mercury poisoning symptoms and how long until mercury kills during the previous 6 months. He'd also been looking into countries that do not extradite to the United States, bookmarking articles about escaping the country and living under false identities after committing crimes. The bank investigation revealed even worse news. He had taken over $40,000 from my accounts in small quantities that I had never detected since I was too bewildered from the poisoning to examine my statements. He'd also applied for 5 credit cards in my name without my knowledge, accumulating $20,000 in debt and purchasing expensive items he might sell later for cash. Detective Holt stated that each fresh piece of evidence strengthened the case, and that if convicted, he faced a minimum sentence of 25 years. The pharmacist friend's lawyer approached me about a deal, stating his client would testify against my fiancé in exchange for a reduced sentence because he was only an accomplice. Why did the pharmacist buddy believe he could simply walk away from helping poison someone? The fact he tried to flee when cops arrived tells me he recognized how bad this was all along. Rachel stated that they would most likely accept the offer because his evidence would seal the case, despite her desire for both of them to languish in prison for what they had done to me. My parents had to change their phone number because reporters kept calling, and my father installed security cameras when someone attempted to climb over the fence to take photos. The story went widespread online, with people debating whether my brother was a hero or a criminal, while the majority thought he did the right thing, even if his methods were excessive. My fiancé's family tried to see him in jail, but he declined, most likely because he knew they'd find him guilty once they heard all of the evidence. His mother sent me a letter through her lawyer claiming that I had ruined her son's life and destroyed their family, but I threw it away after reading the first sentence. The fire marshal completed his investigation and officially declared the altar fire a legitimate emergency response to prevent a murder in progress. This greatly aided my brother's case because it demonstrated that his actions were necessary and proportionate to the threat, rather than random violence or retaliation. As Detective Holt investigated deeper, more evidence emerged, including receipts for mercury compounds hidden in my fiancé's storage unit, as well as syringes and medical equipment. She also discovered a draft email he never sent explaining his plan to make my death appear to be abrupt organ failure caused by an undiscovered disease, complete with fabricated symptoms he claimed I had. 2 weeks later, the hospital connected me with Algra Scott, a psychotherapist who worked with survivors of murder attempts. She had a small office with lamps everywhere and tissue boxes on every surface, which made obvious after we started chatting. Algra urged me to go over the entire relationship from the beginning, and I started noticing all the red signals I'd overlooked. My fiancé had pressured me to move in together quickly, isolated me from people who didn't like him, and made me feel crazy whenever I questioned anything. She explained how abusers act, how they gradually push boundaries, making you doubt yourself until you can't believe your own thoughts anymore. The poisoning was simply the culmination of months of mental breakdown. While I was in treatment, my fiancé's family sent me a letter through their lawyer that made me feel angry. They were not remorseful for what their son did. They were furious with me for wrecking his life by refusing to assist him pay off his gambling debt. His mother stated that if I had been a better spouse and supported him financially, none of this would have occurred. They truly blamed me for motivating him to attempt to kill me, as if I had driven him to buy mercury and plan my murder for months. The lawyer requested that we meet to explore how I might assist their family in recovering from the harm I had inflicted. I put the letter in the garbage and instructed my lawyer to issue a cease and desist order. 3 weeks after the wedding, Henry Wallace from the fire marshal's office visited my parents' house with his final report. He'd spent hours interviewing witnesses, going over the material my brother had, and reconstructing exactly what happened that day. His formal verdict stated that my brother's acts were a reasonable emergency response to avoid an impending murder. The report expressly stated that, with the police chief refusing to act and the final dose about to be administered, setting fire was the only way to end the ceremony. This was essential for my brother's defense since it proved he wasn't simply some crazy individual attacking at random. Victor Shaw, my brother's lawyer, stated that this report would likely result in the majority of the charges being withdrawn or reduced to nearly nothing. During my next treatment session, Dr. Samuel sat down with my most recent test results, his expression somber. The good news was that the mercury levels were lowering and that most of it will ultimately leave my system, but he added that mercury causes lasting nerve cell damage that cannot be repaired. My hands would most likely have a minor tremor, especially when I was weary or worried. Some cognitive impacts, such as difficulty concentrating or remembering, may also linger. He claimed I was lucky my brother stopped taking it when he did because another few doses would have resulted in irreversible brain damage. The tremble in my hands worsened as he spoke, and I realized I'd be carrying evidence of what my fiancé had done to me for the rest of my life. The grand jury convened a month after the wedding, and Rachel Monroe delivered their findings. Aside from the attempted murder and poisoning accusations, detectives discovered that my fiancé had used my identity to open credit cards and take out loans. He had faked my signature on documents and set up false email accounts in my name to approve transactions. The grand jury indicted him on 15 counts, including attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault, identity theft and fraud. His lawyer attempted to negotiate a 15-year plea offer, but Rachel refused anything less than 25. She told me she wanted him locked up until he was too old to harm others. My brother came over one evening when my parents were gone, and we sat on the back porch where we used to play as children. He ultimately told me everything about that night, including how he snuck into the flat and discovered the notebook hidden beneath other books, reading my fiance's notes about my symptoms worsening, calculating how much more mercury I could take, and preparing how to act when I died. He tried to call me, but my fiancé had blocked his number on my phone without my knowledge. Going to the police chief at 2 a.m. was his final hope for legal assistance. When the chief called my fiancé, rather than arresting him, my brother realized he only had a few hours before I died. He bought the petrol can at an all-night station and spent the drive to the chapel trying to think of an alternative route. He could only think of one way to utterly halt everything: set fire to the altar. We both burst into tears, and I told him that I could never thank him enough for saving my life. 2 months after the wedding, the state police arrested the chief on allegations of obstructing justice and abuse of office. They found phone records indicating that he called my fiancé immediately after my brother presented him with evidence. He'd also destroyed the initial report my brother attempted to make and directed other officers to ignore any calls regarding the incident. His 30-year career was finished, and he faced up to 5 years in prison, though everyone expected him to get less. Watching him in handcuffs on the news seemed like a small measure of justice. I returned to rigorous work after 3 months, but it was more difficult than I had anticipated. The mercury had interfered with my ability to concentrate, and I'd lose track of what I was doing midway through chores. My hands shook as I tried to type, and I had to take breaks every hour because I was so fatigued. My boss was very understanding, allowing me to work from home most days with flexible hours. But sitting at my desk, trying to concentrate on spreadsheets while my hands trembled, I wondered whether I'd ever feel normal again. When confronted with actual prison time, the pharmacist friend who had helped prepare everything went completely insane. His lawyer contacted Rachel and offered to testify against my fiancé in return for a lower sentence. He kept meticulous records of every interaction they had regarding dosing, timing, and how to make it appear natural. My fiancé's text conversations revealed him asking about drug interactions and whether mercury would be detected in a regular autopsy. The pharmacist had even taken notes on my fiancé's intention to inject me with a final concentrated dose during our honeymoon. With his testimony, the case against my fiancé was almost certain to end in conviction. My parents announced their separation the week before the trial was set to begin. The stress of everything had made existing problems impossible to ignore. My mother blamed my father for pressuring me to marry, claiming he ignored her reservations about my fiancé because he wanted me to settle down. My father chastised her for not recognizing the indicators of abuse, claiming that a mother should have noticed her daughter had been poisoned. They'd been fighting non-stop since the wedding and decided they needed space. Watching my family fall apart as a result of my fiancé's actions made me detest him more than the poisoning itself. Detective Holt called me the next morning while I was at another treatment session, her voice strained from what she had just learned. She'd obtained a warrant for my fiancé's credit card information and discovered monthly payments to a storage facility across town that he had rented 3 months before we were engaged. The hazmat team discovered 12 vials of mercury compounds, as well as needles preloaded with various doses and a notebook in which he had written down backup plans in case the wedding poisoning failed. He intended to continue dosing me after we married, making it appear like a chronic condition that would gradually kill me over time, while he played the loyal husband caring for his sick wife. The storage container also had bogus medical paperwork he had made, claiming I had a family history of neurological issues and putting up a scenario for after my death. I threw up when she told me about the mercury-filled children's prescription bottles he planned to hide around our future home to appear like an accidental poisoning if anyone became suspicious. My treatments lasted 6 more months, with me visiting the hospital 3 times a week at first, then twice, and then once for monitoring. Dr. Samuel performed blood tests at each visit, observing my mercury levels gradually fall from the dangerous red zone to yellow, and ultimately into the safe range. Finding 12 vials of mercury in that storage container made me wonder how long my fiancé had been planning this entire thing. Was it truly only for our wedding, or has he done this before? My hair started growing back in patches at first, then more evenly, but it was thinner and had a different texture than previously. The tremors in my hands improved but never totally disappeared, especially when I was fatigued or anxious. Some days were worse than others, with headaches that made me want to stay in bed and confusion that caused me to forget simple things like where I had left my keys. Dr. Samuel told me that I was fortunate to have survived it all, as most people with my levels of exposure would have lifelong kidney damage or worse. The trial date was established for 8 months after the wedding, giving both parties time to prepare and allowing me to heal sufficiently to testify. Jury selection alone took 2 weeks due to the media hype, with potential jurors admitting they had already formed opinions after seeing the wedding video that had been released online. The judge had to summon people from nearby counties to discover anyone who had not heard about the burning altar or the hostage situation. Seeing my fiancé in court for the first time since that day made my entire body shake, and I had to rush to the restroom to throw up before we even began. He had lost weight in jail, and his burns had healed to leave brilliant pink scars on his wrists and arms. But his eyes were cold and calculated, much as when he held the knife to my throat. I testified for 3 days in a row, detailing every sign I'd ignored, every lie I'd believed, and every time I'd trusted him with my life without realizing he was steadily stealing it away. His lawyer attempted to make me appear insane, questioning if I had invented or exaggerated symptoms for attention, but the medical records spoke for themselves. She questioned why I hadn't seen my money vanishing, or my health deteriorating, attempting to make me appear ignorant or reckless. I detailed how the mercury had confused me, how he had convinced me that the symptoms were caused by wedding stress, and how he had isolated me from people who could have detected something was amiss. When I described the moment he seized the knife and pushed it against my throat, several jurors appeared distraught, and one woman had tears streaming down her cheeks. My brother stood up next, still looking terrible about the fire, despite the fact that everyone knew he had saved my life. He burst into tears when the prosecutor showed him the notebook entries in which my fiancé estimated exactly how much mercury would kill me, with notes such, "She's weaker than expected," and "Increase morning dose." The courtroom was dead silent except for my brother sobbing as he read aloud the entry from the night before the wedding that said, "Tomorrow she dies." He testified about finding the evidence, attempting to get help from the police, and making the desperate decision to burn the altar when he realized no one could stop the wedding. Even the court was moved when my brother recalled watching me degenerate for months, noting the indications but not knowing what they meant until it was too late. As part of his plea agreement, the pharmacist testified next, staring at the floor the entire time as he admitted to assisting in my murder plot. He validated every allegation, displaying text messages in which my fiancé inquired about prescription combinations and how to make mercury poisoning appear to be a natural disease. My fiancé gazed at him with absolute contempt throughout the testimony, his hands gripped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The pharmacist stated that he knew it was wrong but required the money promised by my fiancé and that he had provided the precise substances and dosing regimens. The defense attempted to prove temporary insanity by bringing in an expert who discussed financial hardship and mental breaks. However, their own witness had to admit that the months of planning, comprehensive journal, and backup plans demonstrated clear premeditation and knowledge of right and wrong. The notebook entries were particularly upsetting, as they demonstrated how he had followed my symptoms with scientific precision and altered doses based on my reactions. After 5 days of waiting while the jury debated, they returned with guilty verdicts on all charges. My fiancé did not react at all, instead staring straight ahead as if he had expected it. However, his mother began yelling from the gallery that I had wrecked their family and ruined her son's life. At my sentencing 3 weeks later, I gave my victim impact statement, my voice quivering as I detailed how he had taken away my ability to trust anyone, my health, and my sense of safety in my own house. I informed the court about my nightmares, therapy sessions, and how I couldn't leave my apartment because I was frightened of everyone. The judge listened to everything and sentenced my fiancé to 35 years in prison with no chance of release for 25 years, calling it one of the most calculated and vicious attempted murders he'd seen in his 30 years on the bench. 3 weeks later, the police chief's trial began, and I had to witness him sit there in his dress uniform, attempting to be dignified, as the prosecutor explained how he shielded his nephew despite seeing proof of attempted murder. The chief continued fixing his tie and glancing at the wall behind the judge, as if he couldn't believe what was happening to him after 30 years in law enforcement. His lawyer attempted to argue that he was only protecting family members and had no knowledge of the full scope of the conspiracy, but phone records proved that he called my fiancé within minutes of my brother approaching him with a notebook. The prosecutor produced text conversations, in which the chief instructed his nephew to handle the matter and cautioned him that my brother was making waves, which directly led to my fiancé hastening his plan to kill me that day. When the verdict was guilty of obstruction of justice and abuse of authority, the chief's wife began crying in the gallery, while he sat with his mouth clenched. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in state jail, as well as the permanent loss of his pension and law enforcement certification, saying he had abused the public trust in the worst way possible. The pharmacist's sentence occurred a month later, and he appeared to have aged 10 years since his arrest, his hands shaking as he stood before the judge. He had fully cooperated with prosecutors, and his testimony had been critical in convicting my fiancé, as his lawyer repeatedly emphasized when pleading for leniency. The judge acknowledged his assistance, but stated that supplying poison to kill someone constituted attempted murder regardless of who delivered it. He received a 5-year sentence with the potential of release in 2 years, as well as the permanent loss of his pharmacist license, and an order to pay restitution for all of my medical expenditures, which would most likely bankrupt him. My brother's community service began that spring, and it didn't escape anyone's notice that he had to teach fire safety courses in the same community center where we had taken swimming lessons as children. He turned up every Saturday morning for 6 months straight, teaching folks about controlled burns and emergency procedures while making dark jokes about becoming an expert through first-hand experience. The kids in his classes adored him because he'd play out the demonstrations and make them interesting rather than boring, even if their parents would mutter about him being the guy who set the church on fire. By summer, I'd started attending a crime victim support group that met every Tuesday in the library's basement, sitting in a circle of metal chairs and drinking awful coffee. That's when I met Victor, who was there because his ex-girlfriend attempted to run him over with her car after he broke up with her for stealing from his business. He understood why I startled when people moved too quickly, or why I still checked my food for strange odors, and he never pushed me to talk about topics I wasn't ready to discuss. We began with coffee after meetings, then supper once a week, taking things so slowly that it was 3 months before he even clasped my hand. My parents' divorce papers were filed that fall, and they sat me down together to explain that the trauma had just exposed existing problems, not created new ones. Mom had obviously been unhappy for years, and Dad had been ignoring it, but seeing their daughter nearly die made them realize they were wasting their lives pretending. They were strangely better as friends than they had been as couples, arriving separately to my therapy appointments yet sending each other updates on my progress. The 1-year anniversary of the wedding arrived faster than planned, and I spent the day with my brother at his apartment, both of us avoiding discussing it while watching movies and eating takeout. I gave him the most recent test results from Dr. Samuel, which revealed that my mercury levels had finally returned to normal, and my liver function had nearly fully recovered. He kept a paper with a magnet on his fridge next to his fire safety instructor credential, which he had acquired after fulfilling all of his community service hours. Through this ordeal, we'd grown closer than we'd ever been as children, texting every day and eating supper together twice a week. That winter, the church contacted to inform me that they had finished rebuilding and that the priest wanted to invite me to a blessing ceremony for the newly constructed altar. I thanked them but declined, knowing that I'd never be able to step into that building without smelling gasoline and burning, or witnessing my brother shove my fiancée into the fire. The priest understood and said he'd pray for my continuous healing, which was great because I hadn't been religious since that day. My fiancé's mother wrote a letter through her lawyer, stating that her son wanted to confess and explain his misdeeds, praying for forgiveness before his first parole hearing in 25 years. Victor was at my flat when it arrived, and he snatched it from my hands before I could finish reading the return address, went straight to the kitchen and discarding it unopened. I didn't need to hear what my fiancé had to say, and I wouldn't give him the comfort of believing I cared about his apologies or explanations. Before his parole hearing, his mother wrote to me and asked for forgiveness. That's ironic given that she claimed I ruined her son's life when he was convicted of attempting to murder me with mercury poisoning. 2 years after the wedding, Victor and I were making supper at my apartment when he turned off the stove and got down on one knee in my little kitchen. He didn't have a ring or a speech prepared. He simply stated that he loved me and wanted to spend his life with me if I would let him. There is no pressure or urgency. I said yes since I'd regained trust through treatment and patience, but we both agreed right away that we'd marry at the courthouse with only our immediate family there. My health had mostly recovered by then, but I still experienced tremors in my hands when I was upset, and my hair never came back as thick as it once had. These reminders of what occurred did not define me, but they became part of my tale, battle scars from surviving someone who claimed to love me while slowly poisoning me to death. My brother began giving those fire safety workshops every Tuesday night at the community center, demonstrating correct extinguisher use and evacuation procedures to groups of 20 or 30 individuals who most likely puzzled why the instructor's hands shook when he lit the demonstration fires. The third week, a woman lingered after class to ask him about the scar on his forearm from being caught in burning debris that night, and he told her the entire tale while they stacked chairs and scrubbed the floor. She returned the following week with handmade cookies for the class and stayed to assist cleanup, this time asking about his job as a carpenter and whether he had always been protective of his family. They went for coffee after the 6th session, and within 2 months they were dating, holding hands at family meals and squeezing his fingers whenever the wedding was discussed. I observed them together at Thanksgiving, how she eased his nerves and made him laugh with anecdotes about her kindergarten kids, and I felt true joy seeing him make something positive out of the darkest night of our lives. 3 years after the wedding, I stood in the state capitol with a large folder containing evidence, medical documents, and testimony from dozens of victims who had contacted me after our tale made national headlines. Our district's representative introduced the Protective Partners Act, which requires banks to flag suspicious account activity in joint accounts, insurance companies to notify both parties of new policies worth more than $50,000, and medical professionals to report suspected poisoning in domestic situations. The committee questioned me for 2 hours about detection procedures, warning indicators, and how my situation could have been avoided with sufficient safeguards in place. Victor sat in the gallery, taking notes, while my brother watched from the back row. They were both present for every hearing and revision until the legislation passed with only 3 dissenting votes. The signing ceremony took place on a Tuesday afternoon, and the governor signed his name with 5 separate pens, giving me the first one in a small wooden box that now hangs on our mantel next to our courthouse wedding photo. Victor and I had our daughter 14 months later, named her after my aunt, who had first verified the poison that day, but we simply call her Sophie. She emerged screaming, with thick dark hair and her father's nose, clutching my finger so tightly that the nurse joked she had inherited her uncle's protective instincts. My brother cried when he held her for the first time, whispering promises about keeping her safe that I knew he'd keep because he'd previously demonstrated his loyalty to family. As she grew, we told her more age-appropriate variations of the narrative. Uncle protected Mommy from a bad man, but we preserved the facts until she was old enough to understand without being terrified. My brother took the fire investigator exam 4 years after the wedding, scored in the top 5%, and was recruited by the county right away. He worked 60-hour weeks analyzing burn patterns, accelerant traces, and witness accounts, eventually becoming the go-to person for tricky cases in other departments. His reports were so detailed that prosecutors relished having his cases because convictions were practically inevitable, and he testified with the same zeal he'd displayed at the altar. He discovered his destiny in protecting others in the same way he had protected me, turning his trauma into a purpose that prevented other families from losing everything to arson. 5 years after the wedding, I was getting coffee downtown when someone yelled my name, and I turned to see the best man standing there with his own drink and a look like he'd seen a ghost. He asked if we could sit for a minute and spent 10 minutes apologizing for striking my brother, not recognizing the truth sooner, and being a part of the group who nearly killed me. I told him it wasn't his responsibility because my fiancé had duped everyone, but he shook his head and said he should have recognized the indications, questioned the life insurance, and done something. We didn't exchange numbers or commit to remain in touch, but the chat offered us both the closure we didn't realize we needed. My mother met her second husband at grief counseling, a widower whose wife had died from cancer, not attempted murder disguised as illness. He was compassionate with her guilt for not protecting me, gentle when she awoke screaming from nightmares of the burning altar, and unconcerned when family dinners involved lengthy conversations about the trial or my continuous medical care. Their wedding was small, with just his immediate family in his backyard, a justice of the peace and grocery store cake. But seeing her smile again, without that haunting look in her eyes, helped me recover as well. Sophie's 5th birthday party was held at a park near our house, with 30 children from her preschool running around while parents spoke over juice and pizza. My brother pushed her on the swing, and she screamed with delight. Victor manned the grill and flipped burgers for the adults. And my parents were sitting at a picnic table, peacefully making vacation plans with my mother's new husband. This ordinary occasion with chocolate cake, party games, and kids bickering over toys felt like the greatest win after everything we'd been through. 10 years have passed since that flaming altar and the knife at my throat, and days go by without my thinking about it at all. Too busy with Sophie's school projects, Victor's promotion, my brother's engagement party, and my mother's garden club fundraising. My tremor only appears under high stress. My hair grew back fuller than before thanks to some costly procedures, and the scar on my throat disappeared to a faint white line that most people don't see. My life is filled of individuals who genuinely want me to live and be happy, which is all I've ever wanted. Thank you for staying around with me and meandering through those memories. TH570. Mom forced me to write, "I am too stupid to think for myself," 10,000 times. Then told everyone we'd died in a fire. But the truth was worse. My mother handed each of her children a unique identity at birth from which we could never escape. Clara was the intelligent one. Mia was the attractive one. Daniel was the stronger one. And I was the dumb one. Mom didn't just label us, she punished us anytime we excelled in the wrong things. She referred to it as preserving the family ecosystem. The allocations were determined within minutes of our births based on Mom's initial thoughts. Clara came forth quiet and watchful, so Mom considered her the smartest one. Mia had delicate features even as a newborn, which made her attractive. Daniel was a huge infant who cried loudly, which made him stronger. I was born last and smallest, struggling to breathe, and Mom assumed I was dumb. She had listed these positions on our birth certificates as medical conditions. Dad left when he understood how serious she was about this. He couldn't bear to witness what she was doing to us. Mom regarded his departure as confirmation that her system operated better without him. When Clara struggled with a math problem, Mom would solve it for her, then hit me if I tried to assist because dumb children do not comprehend mathematics. When I got taller than Mia, Mom forced me to slouch repeatedly until my spine visibly curled so the dumb one couldn't be tall either. She kicked me out of school after 3rd grade, saying I was too stupid to study. But Mom had actually frightened when I began reading above grade level. Daniel was not permitted to cry, even if he had broken bones, because the strong one cannot feel pain. When Mia attained average teenage weight, Mom put her on rigorous diets that caused her to faint on a daily basis, because the pretty one had to stay skinny at all costs. Mom deteriorated as we grew older and began displaying talents that did not match our labels. She gave Mia medication that caused her hair to fall out whenever she demonstrated athletic ability, because lovely females don't sweat. She forced Daniel to lift weights from the age of 6 until his joints were almost completely ruined, ensuring that he would need a cane by the age of 20. When Clara demonstrated creative talent, Mom destroyed her paintings in front of her. But I received it worse since brains was more difficult to destroy than beauty or muscle. Mom forced me to take drugs that made me dizzy and disoriented, claiming they were for my severe learning problem, which I didn't have. My siblings and I sought to protect each other during this nightmare. Clara would covertly educate me from her textbooks after midnight, risking Mom's wrath if we were detected. Mia stole my medicines and replaced them with vitamins whenever she could. Daniel would pretend to chase me away from his weights while actually helping me exercise. We devised an entire hidden language to speak without Mom noticing. We were prisoners together, each struggling with our own curse while attempting to assist the others with theirs. My 15th birthday marked our first escape attempt. Daniel had gathered money from odd jobs, and we intended to flee together, but Mom had installed trackers on our phones and apprehended us at the train station. Her penalty was harsh. Daniel had to lift 100-pound sacks around till his back gave out. Clara had to calculate problems for 16 hours straight before collapsing. Mia spent days staring in mirrors, listing her flaws. And I had to write, "I am too stupid to think for myself," 10,000 times. After that, she took us to this remote farmhouse and told everyone we had died in a fire. 3 years later, I discovered online classes and began surreptitiously studying while Mom assumed I was looking at picture books. My siblings made these elaborate distractions so that I might learn. Clara would fabricate academic issues that required Mom's complete attention. Mia would experience beauty emergencies that took hours to resolve. Daniel would pretend to harm himself in ways that demanded Mom's constant attention. Thanks to them, I completed my GED and applied to colleges using the library's computer. When my acceptance letter from the state institution arrived at our P.O. box, Daniel grabbed it, and we all grieved in the barn. We plotted my escape for months. Clara pretended to have a seizure because her great mind was overworked the night I left, while Mia shattered a mirror and threatened to damage her face. During the hubbub, Daniel snuck me out in his pickup and took me to campus. For one beautiful week, I lived in a dorm and attended school like a regular person. I chose my own clothes, talked in class, and acquired friends who recognized me as just. Then Mom called. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" she asked, unusually calm. "The school inquired about your medical records. I've already withdrawn you. Daniel is bringing you home." I whirled around to find Daniel in my doorway, feeling ill with shame. Behind him, Mom was holding a medical bag. "I'm sorry," he muttered. She threatened to blind Mia and Clara's hands. Mom grinned as she prepared a syringe. "You've upset the whole ecosystem by trying to be smart," she said, walking toward me. "We need to fix that overactive brain permanently. Dr. Whitaker is meeting us at the house. He does special labities that target specific parts of the brain." As Daniel grabbed my arms and Mom raised the needle, she said the words that still haunt me. "Don't worry, sweetie. You won't remember wanting to be anything but dumb once we've finished scooping out the problem parts." The needle drew closer to my skin, and I watched the clear liquid within as Daniel tightened his grip on both of my arms. My heart raced so hard that I felt it would burst as the metal point touched my arm. That's when the banging began on my dorm door, loud enough to shake the entire structure. Mom yanked the needle back and stuffed it into her medical bag just as the door swung open. Tessa Grant, a campus security officer, raced in with her hand on her radio, staring at the three of us locked in strange poses. Daniel still had my arms held behind me, and Mom was zipping her suitcase closed while attempting to appear normal. Grant stepped between us, removing Daniel's hands from mine before leading me behind her to the door. My entire body trembled so violently that I could scarcely stand, and my teeth chattered as if I were frozen. Mom began speaking in her calm medical voice about how concerned she was about my mental health and how I needed assistance. She claimed I had been having episodes and making up stories about the family. Grant stared at the red marks on my arms where Daniel had grabbed me, then at Mom's medical bag on my desk. I attempted to speak, but the shaking caused my voice to crack and sound strange. Grant inquired what was in the bag, and I managed to answer syringe between chatters. Mom said it was merely medication for my condition, but Grant didn't buy it. She called for backup on her radio and blocked the entryway, preventing anyone from leaving. Mom tried to push past her, but Grant raised her hand and stated everyone had to keep still until this was addressed. Grant summoned 2 additional security guards and instructed them to keep an eye on Mom and Daniel while she spoke with me. I told her about the needle and the lobotomy Mom had threatened, my words coming out jumbled and scared. Grant's expression changed from concerned to scared as she phoned for an ambulance on her radio. Mom was attempting to interrupt and explain, but Grant begged her to stay quiet. The ambulance arrived in what seemed like an eternity, but it was really only 10 minutes. The EMTs examined me and discovered the small red mark where the needle had touched my skin. They carried me into the ambulance and Grant informed Mom and Daniel that they would need to come to the station for interrogation. At the emergency room, Dr. Helena Sato evaluated the injection site and photographed it with a special camera. She measured the red lines on my arms and logged everything onto her computer. She ordered blood testing right away to see if any drugs had entered my system. The nurse drew what seemed like 20 tubes of blood while Dr. Sato questioned me about what had transpired. I told her about the medicines Mom had made me take for years, which made me dizzy and disoriented. Dr. Sato's face became increasingly concerned as I recounted the fictitious learning problem. She requested additional testing, including hair samples, which could reveal drug exposure dating back months. The nurse cut little bits of my hair from various locations on my head and placed them in evidence containers. They also made me pee in a cup and take swabs from my mouth. Dr. Sato stated that they will perform every conceivable test to determine what Mom had been giving me. I spent the entire night in the hospital undergoing tests and scans. They performed a brain scan to look for any effects from the long-term drugging. The next morning, a woman named Amelia Cross from the university came to see me. She introduced herself as a case manager and sat down with a large packet of paperwork. She stated that the registration office had discovered the documents Mom had used to withdraw me from school. The papers claimed that I had serious cognitive impairment and could not operate in an academic environment. Amelia stated that the documents were plainly falsified, despite the fact that I had been attending classes for a week without issue. She helped me fill out a FERPA block, which prevented Mom from accessing any of my school records. We spent an hour reviewing several forms for campus safety measures. Amelia began the paperwork for a no-contact order, which would bar Mom from campus. She said it would take a few days to process, but campus security already had Mom's photo. I grabbed my phone to send my siblings our old code word, which meant, "Are you okay?" Mia responded that Mom was home and screaming at everyone about how I had wrecked everything. She stated Mom was on the phone with lawyers, attempting to file for guardianship over me. Mom claimed I was mentally incompetent and needed someone to make decisions for me. Mia informed me that Mom had already called 3 different physicians to ask them to sign documents regarding my alleged handicap. There's something extremely disconcerting about this mother's meticulous control system, which assigns duties from birth based on initial impressions. I'm curious why she is so wedded to these rigid classifications that she would drug and physically hurt her own children. Amelia called legal aid, and within an hour, an attorney named Rachel Monroe arrived. She was young, but she seemed quite sharp and took notes on everything I told her. She told we had to document everything to fight the guardianship attempt. She asked me to write out whatever I could remember about the medications and the abuse. We made lists of all the instances Mom had punished us for excelling at the wrong things. Rachel stated that my college acceptance and grades would help indicate that I was not mentally challenged. Detective Harper Quinn arrived that afternoon to collect my official statement regarding what occurred in the dorm. She asked me to go over everything step by step as she filmed it on a little gadget. She inquired about the long-term pattern of maltreatment, and I explained the roles Mom assigned us. She wanted to know whether I had any proof of what Mom had been doing to us. I remembered the birth certificates Daniel described earlier, where Mom had inscribed our allocated duties. Detective Quinn jotted it down and said she'd look into getting copies from the county record office. I spent the next 2 days going through everything I had, Pulling out my GED certificate from the folder I'd hidden in the barn, printing out my college acceptance letter from the library computer, and screenshotting every text message my siblings had sent me about what Mom was doing to us over the years. Rachel sat with me in the hospital cafeteria, going through everything, making copies and putting everything into folders designated educational competency, pattern of maltreatment, and medical proof. She continued shaking her head at some of the messages, especially when Mia described being forced to throw up after eating normal meals, or Clara talked about having to pretend she didn't comprehend basic ideas in front of Mom. The financial aid office called while we were working, and the woman on the phone sounded perplexed when she stated that my financing had been frozen because Mom had contacted them, claiming I was psychologically unable to manage money. Amelia met us there the next morning, and we waited in those terrible plastic chairs as she completed the override paperwork, explained the issue to the financial aid director, and showed him the police report from the dorm incident. He stated that it would take weeks to process, but promised to expedite it due to the circumstances. Mom began sending emails to my school account that afternoon, long meandering rants about how I was damaging the family ecology, and how the foolish one accepting their place was critical for everyone's well-being. She talked on how Clara's knowledge would suffer without contrast, how Mia's beauty would be meaningless if everyone was equal, and how Daniel's strength stemmed from defending the weak. Rachel instructed me to keep every email but not respond, claiming that these texts were ideal evidence of Mom's abusive mindset and would aid our case. I moved them all to a separate folder and avoided reading them too attentively since they made my hands quiver. Dr. Sato called 3 days later with the blood test results, her voice careful as she explained that they'd discovered traces of sedatives in my system consistent with long-term exposure. Specifically, a type commonly used to treat severe anxiety, but which would cause confusion and cognitive impairment in someone who didn't need them. She was ordering hair follicle testing, which could reveal drug exposure dating back months or perhaps years, and she claimed this information could be critical in pursuing criminal charges against Mom for poisoning or assault. That following evening, Daniel called me sobbing so hard that I couldn't understand him at first. He kept saying he was sorry until finally admitting that Mom was forcing him to pick between helping her bring me home and allowing her to damage Mia and Clara much more than before. His voice trembled as he told me she had hired some guy who discovers people who don't want to be found, and that this person was already tracking my location via phone, computer, or something. I could hear Mom in the background instructing him to quit being weak and that a strong person does not cry over necessary discipline. Detective Quinn set up a meeting for the next day to discuss obtaining a restraining order against Mom, explaining that between the assault attempt in my dorm, the stalking behavior with the tracker she'd mentioned discovering, and the documented pattern of abuse we were establishing, we should have enough for at least a temporary protective order. We met at the police station, where she asked me to fill out additional documents outlining every incident of Mom hurting, threatening, or controlling my life. 3 days later, we went to court for the temporary restraining order hearing. And of course, Mom arrived looking nicely put together in a blue suit with her hair tied back, telling the judge in a calm, logical tone that I was deluded and had always had mental difficulties that required continual monitoring. But then the judge looked at the medical evidence Dr. Sato had given over, read through the letters Mom had written me about the ecosystem, and saw the images Officer Grant had taken of the marks on my arms from the dorm incident, and his expression hardened. He issued a temporary restraining order and set up a hearing for a permanent one, telling Mom that any contact with me would result in arrest. Within hours after leaving the courthouse, Mom began contacting me through other people, cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly messaging me about how I was tearing Mom's heart, and old family friends calling the dorm phone to tell me I was selfish and destroying my family. Rachel documented every single contact as a violation of the spirit, if not the law, of the restraining order, bolstering our argument that Mom couldn't respect boundaries even with legal ramifications. Then someone posted my dorm address on a forum about problem children who abandon their families, alleging I was a dangerous, mentally sick person who had abandoned my poor mother to care for my brothers alone after years of sacrifice. Campus IT assisted me in documenting the doxing by collecting photos and tracking IP addresses, while security began doing additional patrols around my building and checking IDs of anyone who did not appear to be a student. The next day after the doxing incident, the university issued an official no trespass order against Mom, with Officer Grant personally driving out to deliver it to Mom at the farmhouse and warning her that any appearance on campus would result in immediate arrest and criminal trespass charges. 2 days later, I discovered a little parcel crammed in my mailbox among bills and school flyers. Inside was a thumb drive with a sticky note in Daniel's handwriting that simply stated proof. I connected it to my laptop and found scanned copies of all 4 of our birth certificates. My hands began to shake as I saw what Mom had written on each one. She had put our allotted roles in exquisite cursive handwriting right in the official medical condition boxes. Clara said, "Smart one, exceptional cognitive function." Mia said, "Pretty one, aesthetic priority." Daniel said, "Strong one, physical dominance required." Mine said, "Dumb one, severely limited capacity." She literally labeled our legal documents as if they were real medical diagnoses. I printed copies and dashed to Rachel's office without even retrieving my coat. Her cheeks turned white as she examined the birth certificates. "This is premeditated abuse documented from birth," she told me. "I've never seen anything this clear in 20 years of practice." She immediately began making copies for our case file, saying it will be the focal point of our permanent restraining order hearing. That same day my phone vibrated with a text from Mia using our old code. When I translated that, my stomach fell. She had passed out at the farmhouse, and her mother had to rush her to the emergency room. The doctor there observed she was terribly underweight and inquired about her eating habits. Mom explained that Mia was only anxious since her troublesome sister had abandoned the home and was making false charges. Mia stated that the doctor appeared suspicious, but she did not pursue the matter because Mom was present at all times. I contacted Mia back and asked if she could get copies of the medical documents. She was terrified, but she promised to try because Mom's condition was deteriorating by the day. Mom made her weigh herself 3 times a day, and cut her food portions even smaller. The following morning, Detective Quinn called with unexpected news. A neighbor near the farmhouse had seen news coverage of the probe and alerted the police. This woman claimed she had heard odd screaming from our house for years and seen medical supply trucks making deliveries far too frequently for a regular family. She'd always questioned what was going on, but Mom had explained that we were homeschooling special needs children who needed ongoing medical care. Quinn was adding the neighbor's statement to the accumulating body of evidence against Mom. Rachel felt it was time to go after Dr. Whitaker too. She filed an official complaint with the state medical board over his role in Mom's lobotomy threats. Even if he hadn't done anything yet, simply planning such a treatment on a healthy individual would violate every medical ethics standard in existence. The medical board announced that they will conduct an investigation and subpoena his patient data. 3 days later, Rachel called to deliver dismal news. Mom had petitioned for emergency guardianship over me, alleging that I was gravely handicapped and a danger to myself without regular care. The court has scheduled an evaluation for the following week. Rachel pushed hard to get them to agree to utilize an impartial assessor instead of Mom's preferred doctor. Daniel dropping off that thumb drive is like discovering the villain's diary with the wicked scheme written on the cover. Mom genuinely designated her children's birth certificates like grocery shop vegetables. She advised me on what to expect and told me to just be myself and respond honestly. The evaluation was conducted in a small office within the courthouse. The assessor was a woman in her 50s who appeared nice but thorough. I spent 3 hours answering questions, taking basic cognitive tests, explaining my educational background, and discussing the abuse. She asked me to complete math problems, read and explain texts, and demonstrate my understanding of abstract topics. She appeared startled when I handed her my GED certificate and college admission letter. "Your mother claims you have the mental capacity of a young child," she explained cautiously. I handed her the birth certificate in Mom's handwriting, which identified me as the dumb one from birth. The evaluator took thorough notes and stated that she needed time to study all of the information before presenting her recommendation to the court. Meanwhile, Amelia had been striving to obtain me mental health help. She linked me with a weekly on-campus support group for survivors of family abuse. There was a long waiting list for individual therapy, but the group gave me a place to talk to people who understood. The first meeting was difficult, but hearing other people's tales helped me feel less alone and weird. One woman had fled a similar predicament in which her parents assigned her the position of family failure. That night, Daniel sent me a text that made me cry. He'd visited a clinic and had x-rays taken of his joints. The pictures revealed extensive damage from being forced to lift high weights since he was 6 years old. His knees, shoulders and spine all revealed evidence of repetitive stress injuries, indicating that surgery will be required at some point. He described witnessing the physical damage in black and white as breaking through years of Mom's indoctrination. He was finally enraged at what she had done to his body in the name of making him stronger. He considered providing a statement to the police, but he was still concerned about what might happen to Clara if he turned entirely on Mom. Detective Quinn contacted me 2 days later about obtaining a search warrant for Dr. Whitaker's office. She emphasized that the procedure was progressing slowly because he had not done anything wrong yet. Being threatened as a tool for Mom's objectives was insufficient for most judges to issue a warrant. She required additional evidence of actual intent or preparation for the surgery that Mom had threatened. I understood but was irritated that we couldn't simply stop him before something awful happened. The entire legal system appeared to be intended to wait until after crimes had occurred rather than to prevent them. That same afternoon, I returned to my hostel after meeting with Rachel and discovered something strange. A folded piece of paper was placed under my door while I was away. My hands shook as I opened it and read the words written in a familiar handwriting. "Dumb girls who run away get hurt," was all it stated. But I knew Mom's method of writing letters. I called campus security right away, and Officer Grant arrived to take the note as evidence. Security spent hours studying the hallway's camera footage, but whoever departed had avoided all of them. They knew exactly where the blind spots were, so they had been watching and planning. Grant enhanced patrols near my building and suggested that I change my route to class. The next morning when I picked up my backpack for class, it seemed heavier than normal. I couldn't figure out why because I hadn't purchased any new books or supplies. I put everything on my bed and began inspecting all of the pockets and compartments. That's when I noticed it sewed inside the lining at the bottom. Someone had cut up the fabric, put a small GPS tracker, and then sewed it back together. The stitching was clean and nearly undetectable, but I could feel the hard plastic gadget inside. Detective Quinn arrived to retrieve it and stated that she would have it checked for fingerprints. She added stalking charges to the expanding list of offenses we were filing against Mom. The tracker appeared to be pricey, and it had likely been transmitting my location for several days. Later that week, I received encouraging news from the registrar's office. The institution agreed to allow me re-enroll provisionally for 2 classes until the legal issues were resolved. It wasn't the entire course load I desired, but having a regular pattern made me feel more grounded. Taking Introduction to Psychology and English Composition demonstrated that I was competent of college work. Amelia addressed my predicament to my instructors confidentially, and they were understanding. They provided assignment extensions when I had court dates or police meetings. However, juggling coursework and other responsibilities suddenly proved stressful. Some days, I'd go directly from a police interrogation to class, and then a meeting with Rachel. My mind was pushed in too many places, and I struggled to concentrate on my homework. The support group helped me manage my stress, but I still felt like I was drowning at times. 3 weeks after the evaluation, we finally received a decision on Mom's emergency guardianship petition. The evaluator's report said unequivocally that I was completely competent. The court refused Mom's petition and seemed genuinely concerned about the evidence we submitted. He scheduled a full hearing for a permanent restraining order and directed Detective Quinn to continue investigating. According to what my siblings told me, Mom did not take the denial well. That night, Clara used our secret code to send me a worried text. Mom had threatened Clara that if she testified against her, she would ruin her hands, rendering her unable to write or type ever again. Clara considered fleeing, but she had no idea where she would go, or how she would survive alone. She was never allowed to work or develop fundamental life skills. I quickly informed Rachel and Detective Quinn of the threat to Clara. They connected us with Marisol Vega, a social worker who specialized in assisting abuse victims to flee discreetly. Marisol began working with my siblings to organize safe getaways once they were ready. She provided them with information on shelters and transit resources via coded messaging. The difficult part was overcoming years of psychological control that made them scared to leave, as if Mom had convinced them they couldn't live without her, even as she devastated them. 2 days later, I received a call that made me cry with both relief and fear. Mia had eventually escaped to a women's shelter after Mom realized she was secretly communicating with me. Mom discovered Mia's secret phone and began yelling about treason and ecological destruction. Mia grabbed a bag of clothing and dashed out as Mom was trashing the phone. She called me from the shelter, crying but sounding relieved for the first time in years. She stated that she could no longer bear the forced starvation and had finally decided to prioritize her life over Mom's approval. The shelter was keeping her whereabouts a secret while also assisting her in receiving medical treatment for the effects of years of hunger. Within hours, Mom had contacted the police to report Mia as a kidnapped runaway. She said I had indoctrinated Mia and forced her to leave the house against her will. Detective Quinn swiftly confirmed with the shelter that Mia was an adult who freely departed. The fake report added to Mom's ongoing habit of harassment and control. Quinn claimed that every lie Mom told the authorities just strengthened our case. Mom was ruining her own reputation by making these desperate attempts to reclaim control. Meanwhile, Mia was finally able to eat regular meals without someone watching every bite. She told me that the shelter officials were surprised by how thin she was for her height. They sent her to experts who specialize in helping people recover from eating disorders. Mia admitted it felt strange to eat without guilt, but she was determined to get healthy. She wanted to be strong enough to speak up about what Mom had done to all of us. Rachel began putting together a civil harassment claim the next morning based on everything Mom had been doing online, pulling up screenshots of posts claiming I was mentally ill and dangerous, documenting every fake account she'd created to spread lies about me, and tracking down the original doxing post with my dorm address. She spread papers across her desk, demonstrating how Mom had written on parent sites that I was a runaway with significant brain injury who needed to be taken home for medical treatment. She made bogus missing person flyers using my photo, claiming I had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. She even created a website called Help Bring Maya Home, which had fabricated details concerning my alleged problems. Rachel stated that having both criminal and civil cases would provide many options for stopping Mom's behavior, as different courts may issue different types of orders with varying consequences. While she worked on that, Dr. Sato called with the hair analysis results, and I could hear the shock in her voice as she explained that the test revealed I'd been exposed to sedatives on a regular basis for at least 4 years, with levels that suggested someone had purposefully drugged me, rather than providing me with proper medical care. The concentration patterns in different sections of my hair formed a timeline indicating that the drugging began around the time I turned 14 and continued until I escaped to college, with the highest levels occurring within the last year, when Mom must have increased the doses to keep me confused as I grew older. Dr. Sato stated that she had never seen anything like it outside of criminal poisoning cases and was writing a detailed report that would considerably bolster any criminal accusations brought. That same afternoon, a letter arrived from Dr. Whitaker's office, claiming that there was no record of any planned procedures for me, and denying any discussions with my mother about medical interventions. But Rachel observed the cautious wording, which avoided indicating he had never discussed it with Mom at all. How did Mia know exactly when to grab her belongings and flee while Mom was busy breaking the phone? The time felt ideal, as if she had been plotting her departure for centuries. The letter repeatedly used language such as no formal consultations and no scheduled appointments. That sounded more like legal protection than honest denial. It also highlighted their office's commitment to appropriate medical ethics 3 times, which Rachel believed demonstrated a sense of guilt. Detective Quinn devised a plan to obtain additional evidence and had me phone Dr. Whitaker's office while she taped everything, instructing me to ask generic questions about whether they ever made house calls or private treatments. Dr. Whitaker called, and while he didn't admit anything specific about me, he did mention that his practice occasionally handled difficult cases requiring discretion and private procedures for families with special circumstances, which Quinn said was reason enough to investigate his medical license and subpoena his records. Daniel contacted me 2 days later, crying, because he'd torn something in his knee during one of Mom's forced training sessions, in which she made him carry 200 pounds up and down stairs for 3 hours straight. The doctor at urgent care stated he required surgery and would be on crutches for at least 2 months, which meant he couldn't perform the crazy strength exercises Mom insisted on anymore. He informed me that the injury was almost a relief since it provided him a reason to stop being Mom's enforcer. While he pondered out how to get away, I could hear the pain in his voice, which was caused by both a physical injury and years of joint deterioration. Marisol had been working with him to arrange transportation to a men's shelter whenever he was ready to leave. Devising a complete escape plan with a volunteer who would pick him up during one of his physical therapy appointments, so Mom wouldn't notice he was gone until hours later. But Daniel kept hesitating because he was afraid of what Mom would do to Clara if he and Mia left, stating he couldn't leave our sister to face Mom's fury alone, even if remaining was ruining his body. He had been the enforcer for so long that the guilt of leaving Clara alone was eating him alive. Marisol had to constantly reminding him that if Mom ruined his ability to walk, he couldn't defend anyone. A week later, while I was headed to class, I observed someone in a large coat and sunglasses following me across campus. And, despite the disguise of a wig and other clothes, I recognized Mom's gait quickly after years of observing her mood shifts. I texted Officer Grant right away and continued going toward the campus security office as Mom approached, reaching into her purse for something I couldn't see. Grant apprehended her just outside the library, and when Mom tried to explain that she was only a concerned parent checking on her daughter, Grant reminded her of the no trespass order and called for backup. After years of Mom having complete control over every part of our life, it felt surreal to see Grant place handcuffs on her while she yelled about her parental rights. Mom was charged with criminal trespass and breaking a restraining order, and the prosecutor stated that this arrest would greatly help our case because it demonstrated Mom's inability to respect legal boundaries. 3 weeks later, at the permanent restraining order hearing, a neighbor near the farmhouse testified that she heard shouting at all hours and saw medical supply trucks making deliveries that looked excessive for a regular family. She remembered discovering me once when I was 15, stumbling around bewildered in her yard because the drugs Mom gave me had made me dizzy and I'd gotten lost, and how Mom had hauled me home, claiming I was gravely impaired and prone to wandering. Combined with all of our other evidence, including the birth certificates with our allocated responsibilities, the drugging proof, and Mom's serial infractions, the judge appeared increasingly worried as the case progressed. The judge issued a 3-year restraining order with such tight conditions that Mom could not contact us directly or through third parties, could not come within 500 feet of us, and could not write about us online. Mom's counsel claimed that it was excessive for a mother attempting to help her children, but the judge determined that the pattern of abuse and recent offenses indicated a significant ongoing threat that warranted maximal protection. Within days, Mom filed a defamation case, saying I was lying about everything and damaging her reputation with bogus charges of abuse, seeking emotional distress damages, and demanding I publicly renounce my delusions about being drugged and controlled. Rachel simply smiled when she received the case and quickly began preparing an anti-SLAPP motion to have it dismissed, saying that this type of reprisal was frequent among abusers attempting to quiet their victims through legal intimidation. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed when the judge ruled on Rachel's anti-SLAPP motion, and I saw Mom's face get crimson as he stated that her case was plainly intended to keep me from testifying about my own abuse experiences. The judge ordered her to pay all of my legal bills within 30 days and warned that any future litigation would be considered harassment, despite Mom's lawyer's attempts to argue that this was about safeguarding a mother's reputation. But the judge didn't buy it at all. Detective Quinn called me that afternoon to say she had finally received approval for the search warrant based on everything we had provided her, as well as the neighbor's testimony and additional evidence from other families who had dealt with Dr. Whitaker. She informed me that they would be investigating the farmhouse the next morning for medical supplies, drugs that had not been prescribed to anyone, and any documentation of Mom's ecosystem system, and asked if there was anything in particular they should look for. I told her about Mom's filing cabinet in her bedroom, where she maintained all of our growth charts, charting how well we performed in our assigned duties, and the locked box under her bed where she kept the medicines she forced me take. The search team discovered far more than I expected, including detailed notebooks dating back to our births in which Mom recorded daily observations about how to keep us in our roles, bottles of prescription sedatives with no patient names, and 17 different tracking devices she had planned to use on us. They also discovered written emails between Mom and Dr. Whitaker detailing cognitive correction techniques for troublesome children, as well as receipts for medical equipment with no legitimate use in an ordinary family. Detective Quinn subsequently showed me images of the evidence room, which made my stomach turn. Seeing everything put out on tables with evidence tags, especially the syringes and vials Mom had been collecting for whatever she was plotting next. Mom was arrested at her motel within hours of the search for assault, stalking and child endangerment based on the evidence discovered. Detective Quinn also stated that Dr. Whitaker was under investigation when it was determined that he had performed these specific operations on other families as well. Mom's mugshot showed her still attempting to appear composed, but you could see the wrath in her eyes as her perfect system was finally revealed to the public. The next day, Daniel was called in for questioning about his role in bringing me back from college, and I felt horrible thinking he could be in trouble for something Mom forced him to do. The detective who interviewed him called me later to say they weren't bringing charges because it was evident Daniel was also a victim who had been threatened and manipulated, which appeared to help him finally recognize that what Mom did to all of us was abuse. Mia went to the police station that week to give a sworn testimony regarding the diet pills and forced starvation, bringing photos of her at her thinnest and medical documents from many fainting episodes that Mom had disregarded. Calera submitted a written testimony that included images of her burned paintings and extensive explanations of the penalties she received for displaying any artistic talent, as well as witness testimonials from 2 former neighbors who saw the smoke from Mom's work. Their courage in stepping out bolstered the case, and the prosecution stated that having all 4 siblings confirm the abuse pattern made it nearly impossible for Mom to argue this was simply one unhappy child making things up. Mom posted bail 3 days later and began showing up at the courthouse throughout my hearings for the restraining order appeals, standing exactly 5,001 feet away, which was technically outside the order but clearly intended to intimidate me. Each time she arrived, campus security or court authorities took photos and measurements, adding to the proof that she could not respect limits, even when facing serious criminal accusations. The trauma began to strike me hard after the immediate threat had passed, and I found myself jumping anytime someone walked behind me, or unable to sleep because every sound made me believe Mom had discovered a way around the restraining order. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. I was in complete terror, convinced that I had heard her voice or smelt the medicine from the pills she forced down my throat, despite the fact that I knew she couldn't come near me. Amelia assisted me in getting on the waiting list for trauma therapy through the university counseling facility, but they stated it could take weeks before a seat became available due to the high demand. She also linked me with an online support group for family violence survivors, which was beneficial, knowing that others understood what it was like to be terrified of your own mother. Prosecutor Julianne Price arranged a conference with me and Rachel to discuss a plea deal he was considering for Mom, in which she would plead guilty to assault and stalking in exchange for the more serious charges being dropped. He said that trials are extremely difficult for victims because they require them to testify and relive everything in detail, and that this agreement ensured she would receive probation with forced mental therapy, as well as a long-term no-contact order with all of us. Finding medical supply trucks making regular deliveries to an ordinary residence makes me wonder how many people sensed anything amiss but never inquired about what was going on inside that farmhouse. The stipulations included 3 years of probation, with any violation resulting in immediate jail time, twice weekly forced therapy that she would have to pay for herself, and a 10-year restraining order that covered all 4 of us kids with no exceptions for holidays or family activities. I contacted my siblings that night, and we discussed for hours about whether to support the plea deal, with Daniel saying he simply wanted it to be finished, Mia fearing Mom would find a way around any limits, and Clara hoping the treatment would truly help Mom recognize what she had done to us. We eventually agreed that our safety was more important than seeing Mom receive the maximum sentence, and that having a predetermined outcome was preferable to risking a trial where anything could go wrong. 2 days later, we all signed letters to the prosecutor expressing our support for the plea offer, and Mom pleaded guilty in court to assault and stalking, while the judge ensured she understood she was agreeing to stay away from all of us for a decade. Detective Quinn informed me that after our story reached the local news, 3 other families had contacted the medical board regarding Dr. Whitaker offering unusual therapies for their children that were not standard medical procedures. The board immediately suspended his license while they examined everything, and Quinn stated that he would most likely never practice medicine again, which meant Mom had lost her major medical person, who would have done the horrific thing she threatened. Mia texted me a week later, saying she'd found a little apartment just 2 blocks from university with money our grandmother had left us that Mom had no idea about, and she was finally eating actual meals after years of starvation. She said her body was gradually learning what normal felt like, and she'd joined the waiting list for eating disorder therapy at the Student Health Center, even though it could take months to get in. Daniel texted me that he had begun physical therapy for the damage to his joints caused by being forced to lift weights since he was 6 years old, and that the therapist was astounded by how terrible things were. He also stated that he had joined a support group for men who had been abused, and that he was sorry for assisting Mom that day in my dorm room, even though he realized I probably couldn't forgive him just yet. I admired his efforts to make things right, even if I wasn't ready to totally trust him again after what had transpired. Clara contacted me one afternoon to tell she had acquired a job at an art supply store downtown and had resumed painting in the back room during her breaks, where no one could see her. She wasn't ready to show anyone her work yet because Mom's burning of her paintings haunted her, but just holding a brush made her feel more like herself. After weeks of paperwork and meetings, the financial aid office finally finalized my dependence override, proving Mom no longer had influence over my education. They reinstated my whole financial aid package and placed permanent blocks on all of my records, ensuring that Mom would never have access to them again, allowing me to register for full-time school next semester without fear of her interference. My siblings and I began texting each other using a combination of our old secret language from childhood and normal discourse, because we all needed to keep connected while also acknowledging that we were all suffering with trauma in various ways. Mia was concentrating on her physical recuperation, Clara on her artistic side, and Daniel was dealing with his remorse over being Mom's enforcer all these years. I was finally taken off the waiting list for treatment and met with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and control issues. She listened to my entire experience without passing judgment and informed me that what Mom did was severe psychological and physical abuse, not just rigorous parenting as she always claimed. That night, after therapy, I slept the entire night for the first time since escaping. No nightmares about Mom finding me or waking up in terror believing I heard her voice. The prosecutor called to tell me that during Mom's first probation check-in, the officer had to caution her because she had attempted to reach us through a cousin who had called Mia, wondering why we were so nasty to our mother. The probation officer logged the infraction and informed Mom that any further efforts would result in instant jail time, making me feel like the system was genuinely protecting us for once. Mia, Clara and I decided to meet for coffee at a little shop near college, marking the first time the 3 of us had been together without Mom directing every word and movement. We were all injured in different ways, with Mia remaining too thin, Clara's hands shaking slightly, and me continually looking over my shoulder, but we were learning what it meant to simply exist as ourselves. Mia ordered an entire lunch without calculating calories, Clara doodled on napkins, and I discussed my classes without pretending to be foolish. We spent 3 hours being normal sisters for the first time in our lives, with no roles to perform or penalties to dread. Walking to my morning English lesson the next week, I realized I wasn't looking behind me every few feet or calculating escape routes in case mom came up. The sun felt nice on my face, as other students rushed past me to get to their classes, leaving me as just another college student on his way to learn something new. I sat in the front row and raised my hand to answer a question about the reading, unconcerned that being smart would get me hurt. When I finished my answer, the professor grinned and stated I had made an outstanding point, which would have gotten me a beating at home, but here it simply meant I understood the material. After class, I walked to the library to study for my psychology exam, without hunching my shoulders or shuffling my feet to appear less adept. Other students were studying around me, and I took out my textbooks and highlighters as if everything was normal, as if I belonged here just as much as everyone else. The stupid one was attending college classes and developing acquaintances who knew me simply as Maya, not as someone allocated to a sick family ecosystem. I had a future that mom said I couldn't have. Even though we all had a long way to go in our healing, we were now free to be who we truly were, rather than who she decided we needed to be. My parents forced me to hand over 50% of my paycheck to my golden child brother. Years later, I finally got my revenge at my wedding. My name is Aurora, and I am 30 years old. I have always had a problematic connection with my younger brother, James, who is 10 years old and male. Growing up, our parents continuously preferred him, causing a lot of conflict between us. They would praise James for even the smallest accomplishments while scarcely mentioning my own. Our family dynamics were not always like this. When I was younger, before James was born, my parents made me feel loved and supported. They'd take me to the park, give me bedtime tales, and proudly hang my artwork on the fridge. However, everything changed when James came. James was always destined to be the golden child. Our parents adored him, frequently ignoring my needs in the process. As we grew older, our preference simply grew stronger. I distinctly recall my 10th birthday. I had been begging for a bicycle for months, leaving clues and magazine clippings about the house. When the big day arrived, I eagerly opened my presents, only to discover clothing and books. My parents explained that a bicycle was prohibitively expensive. Only 2 weeks later, they presented James with a brand new bike for no apparent reason. When I inquired why he got one and I didn't, they answered, "James needs more exercise. You're fine without one." This pattern persisted during our childhood. When I made honor roll in middle school, my parents barely looked at the certificate. When James received a B+ on a single test, the entire family went out to supper to celebrate. As we approached adolescence, the disparity in how we were treated became more evident. When I was 16, I obtained my first part-time work in a neighborhood bookshop. I was ecstatic to finally have my own source of income and began saving for education. However, my enthusiasm was short-lived. James, then 13, protested to our parents that it was unfair that I spent money while he did not. Instead of encouraging him to wait until he was old enough to obtain his own work, our parents demanded an unreasonable amount. They requested I give James half of my monthly profits. I was taken aback and attempted to protest, but they threatened to fire me if I refused. Reluctantly, I consented, watching my brother spend half of my hard-earned money on video games and junk food. This incident laid the stage for James to feel entitled to my belongings. Throughout high school, he would frequently borrow my possessions without my permission, clothes, devices, and even my automobile once I obtained my license. If I dared to protest, my parents would lecture me on the value of sharing with my brother. They never seemed to think James should learn to respect other people's property. Despite the continual favoritism, I studied hard in school, believing that academic accomplishment would eventually gain me some attention from my parents. When I was accepted to my dream institution with a partial scholarship, I was overjoyed. I went home to tell my parents, expecting a proud reaction. Instead, they provided a cold response saying, "That's nice, honey," before immediately shifting the conversation to James's last football game. In contrast, when James was accepted into a local community college a few years later, our parents threw him a magnificent celebration. They invited the entire extended family, scheduled catering, and even hired a live band. As I watched them celebrate James's subpar performance, I couldn't help but feel hurt and resentful. The final straw occurred during my second year of college. I'd been saving for months to purchase a high-quality camera for my photography class. Photography had become my passion, a creative outlet for dealing with the stress of my familial situation. I had done significant research and had finally discovered the right camera for my budget. I returned home for Christmas break, excited to finally make my purchase. However, when I went to collect my savings, I realized that a large amount was missing. I quickly discovered that James had taken the money without permission to purchase a new gaming console. When I confronted him, he dismissed it, stating I could simply save up again. Our parents refused to force him to return the console or repay me, dismissing my anguish with a nonchalant, "You should have hidden your money better." This encounter was my breaking point. I knew that regardless of what I did, I would never be a priority in my family. Following that, I distanced myself as much as possible. I worked extra jobs to support myself through college, rarely returning home for trips. When I did, James made snarky remarks about how I thought I was too good for the family. Our parents never reprimanded his behavior, constantly commenting on how I had changed and gotten distant from them. Despite the emotional toll, I graduated with honors and found a nice position in marketing. At my new job, I met Ryan, a 32-year-old male who would become my rock and biggest supporter. We've been dating for 5 years, and he's been quite tolerant about my familial circumstances. Ryan's family is friendly and accepting, demonstrating what healthy family connections should be like. Ryan proposed 6 months ago while on a surprise weekend getaway. It was a lovely moment, and I was so excited to begin planning our future together. However, the excitement of our engagement was swiftly replaced by the fear of dealing with my family during the wedding planning process. After considerable thought and consideration, I decided not to invite James or my parents to the wedding. I want our special day to be full with love and optimism, not the negativity and animosity that has plagued my relationship with my family. Last week, my mother contacted me in tears, asking to know why they hadn't received wedding invitations yet. I took a big breath and said that, given our past, I did not feel comfortable having them attend the wedding. She accused me of being selfish and attempting to punish them, while rejecting my feelings as usual. My father then called, stating I was crushing James's heart by omitting him from such a special day. Apparently James had been telling everyone he was going to be my best man, despite the fact that we hadn't spoken for years. The arrogance of his assumption had me stunned. I held firm and told them my decision was final. This resulted in James bombarding my phone with angry texts, calling me every name in the book. He accused me of being jealous of him and attempting to make myself feel significant. It was as if he had rebuilt our upbringing in his imagination, making himself the victim. My parents have threatened to cut me out of their will if I don't invite them all to the wedding. This threat may have worked years ago, but I no longer expect or want anything from them. Ryan fully supports my decision, recognizing how toxic my familial dynamics are. He has offered to handle any further correspondence with them in order to protect me from their manipulative tactics. Some of my pals, however, have recommended that I simply invite them to preserve the peace. They claim that if I do not have my family present at my wedding, I will regret it. Their remarks have sown the seed of doubt in my thoughts. Am I being overly harsh? Should I give them one final chance? But then I remember all of the pain and disappointment, and I am reminded of why I made this decision in the beginning. I realize this is a long essay, but I felt it was necessary to provide background for why I'm making this decision. So, Reddit, am I an asshole for refusing to have my brother and parents attend my wedding? Update 1. I'd like to thank everyone for their enormous support on my original article. Your remarks and words have given me courage at this tough time. I wanted to provide an update on the issue, as there have been significant changes in the last several weeks. After more discussion with Ryan, I decided to hold firm on my decision not to invite James or my parents to the wedding. However, Ryan advised that I meet with them in person to explain my reasoning, which could give some closure for all of us. Although I was hesitant, I decided it was worth a shot. We decided to meet in a neutral spot, a quiet cafe in a nearby town. I arrived with Ryan, feeling both anxious and determined. My parents and James were already there, with my mother's eyes red from crying and my father sporting his usual disapproving grimace. James, surprise, appeared more reserved than I expected. As soon as we sat down, my mother broke into a sobbing tirade about family loyalty and how I was pulling everyone apart. My father interfered with remarks about how ungrateful I was behaving. I let them speak while taking deep breaths to remain cool. When they eventually ran out of steam, I politely expressed my stance. I brought up specific examples of how they had harmed me over the years, such as the camera incident and the persistent favoritism. I informed them that, while I cared about them, I didn't think we had a relationship that warranted them attending my wedding. To my surprise, James spoke up in a hushed voice. He revealed that he purposefully broke my camera in college. He admitted that he had always been concerned about my academic achievement and regretted that I was leaving him behind by going to college. He stated he wants to take me down a notch to make himself feel better. The table became silent following this revelation. Our parents appeared astonished, as if they were witnessing our dynamic for the first time. My mother tried to make things better by saying, "Well, that was a long time ago, we should let bygones be bygones." But I wasn't having it. I pointed out that James's admission confirmed my point regarding our family's unhealthy dynamic. My father then attempted a new method. He offered to pay for the entire wedding as long as we included them. This financial trickery effort caught me off guard. I declined, stressing that it was not about money, but about surrounding ourselves with sincere supporters. James looked to be really disturbed about this. He began raving about how I had always thought I was superior than the family, and that I would come to regret pushing them away. It was as if all of his previous remorse had vanished, replaced by the same rage and hatred. At that point, Ryan, who had been silently supportive throughout the conversation, recommended we leave. As we stood up, my mother grabbed my arm and asked, sobbing, if this meant I was cutting them out of my life permanently. I honestly told her that I didn't know, but that I needed time to heal and think things through. In the days since this meeting, my phone has been constantly buzzing with messages from extended family members. James and my parents appear to have been fabricating their own version of events, claiming that I am suffering a mental breakdown and attempting to destroy the family. My aunt even called to suggest that I postpone the wedding until I come to my senses. The steady flood of messages and phone calls has been extremely taxing. I found myself questioning my decision at times, wondering if I was overreacting. But then I remember the years of hurt and rejection, and I realize I'm doing the right thing for myself. Ryan has been my rock throughout this. The way my family handled me at the meeting just strengthened his support for my decision. He recommended we go on a weekend trip to get away from the drama and work on our relationship. We ended up heading to a small beach town a couple hours away. During our trip, we spent time wandering on the beach, trying out various eateries, and simply enjoying each other's company without the cloud of family drama hovering over us. One evening, as we watched the sunset, Ryan told me how proud he was of me for sticking up for myself. He reminded me that we are now forming our own family, one based on mutual respect and love. This getaway was just what I needed to reinforce my decision and focused on the wonderful future that awaits us. We even discussed moving to a new place after the wedding to get a fresh start away from the continual reminder of my family's destructive behavior. When we came home, I made the painful decision to block my family's phone number and social media profiles. It felt severe, but I knew I had to safeguard my peace of mind. As the wedding date approached, we took some practical steps to ensure that everything went as planned. We have hired security for the venue in case any unauthorized guests show up. We've also password protected all of our vendor accounts, ensuring that no one can change our plans. It's unfortunate that we need to take these precautions, but I want to be prepared for everything. As the wedding date approaches, I'm trying to focus on the positives, marrying the love of my life surrounded by people who have become family. Yes, I'm still unhappy about the situation with my biological family, but I'm learning to realize that I can't change them or make them appreciate me. All I can do now is move forward and build the life and family I deserve. Thank you for your continued support. It means more than you realize to have people acknowledge my feelings after years of being gaslighted by my family. I'll post another update after the wedding to let everyone know how things go. Update 2. It's been almost a month since my previous update, and I wanted to share some progress with my family and our wedding arrangements. First, some good news. Ryan and I have finalized the majority of the plans for our wedding, and we are both getting excited. We've decided to host a smaller celebration than we originally anticipated, with only our closest friends and Ryan's family in attendance. This approach makes it feel far more intimate and important. We've selected a lovely garden setting for the ceremony and reception. The florist has created magnificent arrangements with my favorite flowers, and we've planned a menu to suit both of our interests. Ryan and I have been practicing our first dance, which has resulted in a lot of laughs and stepped on toes, but it's been a good way to unwind from all of the family turmoil. Now for some bad news. Despite my stated wishes, my family has continued to interfere with our wedding plans. Last week, my mother showed up unexpectedly at my employment. I was in a meeting when a colleague came to get me, claiming there was a distraught woman in the lobby who insisted on seeing me. When I got to the foyer, I discovered my mother in tears, raising a commotion. She was crying and begged me to reconsider, claiming she had already purchased a wedding gown and couldn't face the prospect of not watching her baby girl walk down the aisle. She had brought photo albums from my childhood, hoping that seeing photographs of happier times might change my viewpoint. I was humiliated and angered that she would ambush me at work in that manner. I told her to leave and that if she performed another stunt like that, I would have to call security. She departed in tears, and I felt uncomfortable and preoccupied for the rest of the day. My supervisor was understanding, but I couldn't get rid of the sensation of humiliation. A few days after this encounter, James sent me a lengthy email. Compared to his earlier angry messages, this one appeared more contemplative. He wrote about how he'd been thinking a lot since we met at the cafe. He admitted that he had been a lousy brother growing up and promised to make amends. James went into depth about how he had always been overshadowed by my accomplishments and had acted out due to his own anxieties. He even offered to pay for the camera he shattered all those years ago, claiming he had researched the model and determined its current value. While I admired the gesture and the obvious self-reflection, I couldn't help but think it was too little, too late. Years of hurt and animosity do not dissipate with a single email, no matter how well intended. I responded, thanking him for his apology but stating that I needed space and that my choice on the wedding was definite. Unfortunately, things took a turn when I discovered James had somehow obtained the contact information for our wedding venue. The venue coordinator called me, sounding confused. She explained that someone pretending to be Ryan had called and attempted to add 3 names to the guest list. Fortunately, the organizer was alert and consulted me before making any adjustments. I was astounded to find that James had gone to such extremes. It felt like a massive violation of my boundaries, and I wondered if his apology email was genuine, or simply another manipulation attempt. This incident confirmed my choice not to invite them. Ryan was enraged when I informed him of James's attempted lie. He advised we look for a restraining order because he was concerned that my relatives would try to disrupt the wedding. We're thinking about our alternatives, but I'm hesitant to take legal action unless absolutely necessary. The prospect of taking legal action against my own family, no matter how justifiable, feels like a significant step. On a more positive side, Ryan's family has been really supportive throughout this. Last weekend, his parents asked me over to supper, and his mother pulled me away for a private conversation. She told me that she already considered me a daughter and was proud of me for advocating for myself. It was touching to feel so embraced and cherished by them, especially given my own family's actions. As the wedding approaches, I'm trying to focus on the positive and not let my family's behavior overshadow this beautiful occasion. Ryan and I have begun premarital counseling, which has been quite beneficial in processing everything that has occurred and improving our communication. We've been talking about our hopes for the future and how we want our relationship to vary from what I had growing up. We've also chosen to plan something unique for our bachelor and bachelorette parties. Instead of large parties, we have scheduled a private cooking class for ourselves and our wedding party. It is nice to develop new traditions that are meaningful to us, rather than conforming to others' expectations.